Welcome back to Harry's Cosmos. Today's adventure: what if Harry and Hermione were crowned the true heirs of the Black Dynasty? Before we dive in, if you're enjoying these stories, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a tale from the cosmos. Now let's begin. Chapter 1: The Summons of Ash and Blood. At 2:30 in the morning, the oldest house in London remembered that it was alive. Number 12 Grimmauld Place had spent decades pretending otherwise. It had learned the trick of stillness the way an old soldier learns to sit through a parade, spine straight, eyes forward, thinking of nothing. Its shutters did not rattle, its floorboards had given up complaint. Even the portraits along the stairwell had settled into a kind of painted sleep, their varnished mouths shut, their painted hands folded across painted laps. For years the house had held its breath, and the breath had gone stale in it, and no one had thought to open a window. Then in the deep of that July night, a thread came loose in the great tapestry on the drawing-room wall, and the house woke. It did not wake gently. A single stitch of silver, buried in the black warp of the family tree, unpicked itself from the weave and lifted into the air, glowing. It hung there, a bright filament trembling above the branching names, and where it had been a small char mark showed the old scorch of a name burned away generations before. The scorch began to heal. The blackened wool knitted itself back gold, letter by letter, and a name that no living black had spoken aloud in 140 years came slowly up out of the dark like a swimmer surfacing. The candles in the drawing-room guttered. The dust on the mantel stirred without any wind to move it. And down in the kitchen, hunched over the long scarred table with a cold cup of tea forgotten at his elbow, Sirius Black felt the change go through the floor and up the legs of his chair and into his teeth, and he set the cup down very carefully and said, to no one, "So it's you at last." He had not slept. He rarely did these last weeks. There was a thing gathering in the house that he could not name and could not stop, a pressure behind the walls, and it had made a light sleeper of a man who had once slept through cannon fire in a stone cell across the sea. He rose, his knees answered him slowly. 41 had come to him harder than it came to other men, as things generally did, but he crossed the kitchen with the old cat-footed quiet still in him and took the stairs 2 at a time. The drawing-room was full of light, not lamplight. The tapestry itself was burning without smoke, cold fire running the length of the family tree, tracing every branch and node, illuminating 1,000 names in a green-gold shimmer that threw Sirius's shadow tall against the ceiling. He stopped in the doorway. He had grown up under this tapestry. He had been shown it as a child the way other children were shown the ocean, told this is what you are, this is where you end and where you cannot go, and he had hated it with a clean, pure hatred for most of his life and had never once in all that hating seen it do this. 2 names were on fire brighter than the rest. One wrote high on a branch that hooked away from the main trunk and dead-ended in a scorch, a daughter's line, cut off and cast out. IOLA, the gold letters spelled, the name resolving even as he watched, and beneath it, faint, the ghost of an appended word the weavers had once meant as a curse. Married a muggle, the scorch beneath it was healing. The line that had been severed was growing back, reaching down through the dark of the wall toward names that had never been written there at all. The other name he knew in his own bones, because it was near his own. Dorea on a branch that curled off toward the Potter Arms, a marriage the family had tolerated because the Potters were rich and old and in the end pure enough. Dorea Black, who had married Charles Potter. Dorea Black, whose blood ran, thinned and quiet, down through a son and a grandson to a young man asleep across the city with his mother's eyes and his father's untidy hair. Sirius stood in the burning light and understood 2 things at once, and both of them frightened him, and he was not a man easily frightened. The first was that the house had chosen. After all these years of his refusing it, of his letting the name rot rather than take it up, the old magic beneath the floor had reached past him and made its own decision, and the decision had a shape he could see forming on the wall like frost on a window. The second was that he was not the only one who would feel it. Whatever woke in this house tonight had woken things in other houses too, and there were houses in London where men had been waiting a very long time for exactly this. Creature, he said, the elf was already there. He had come up soundlessly and stood at the edge of the light with his bat ears trembling and his old face turned up toward the tapestry, and there was on that face a look Sirius had never seen there in all the grim years of their war with one another. Not spite, not grief, but a terrible, attentive hope, the look of a servant who has waited his whole life at a door and has finally heard, on the other side of it, a key turning in the lock. "The heart is waking, master," Creature whispered. "The heart remembers its own." "I know," Sirius said. "Wake me an owl, no 2 owls, and put the kettle on, we're going to need it." Harry Potter received the summons as he received most things that mattered, too early in his socks with his hair standing up in ways that would have grieved his mother. He had a flat in a nondescript building near the river, chosen precisely because it was nondescript, because after everything he had wanted for a while to be a man no one looked at twice. It hadn't worked, not really, people still looked. But the flat was quiet and the neighbors didn't know him and he could stand at his own window at 3 in the morning and drink tea and be, for an hour, nobody's symbol. He was doing exactly that when Sirius's patroness poured through the wall. The great silver dog landed on his hearthrug and shook itself and turned to face him, and out of its open jaws came his godfather's voice, stripped of its usual laughter. "Harry, come to Grimmauld Place. Now tonight, quick as you can, and bring Hermione if you can raise her. Something's happening I need you both to see with your own eyes before anyone tells you what to think about it. Don't dawdle. And Harry, you're not in any danger, but the house is. Come." The dog dissolved. Harry was already reaching for his boots. He raised Hermione first because Sirius had asked and because it would not have occurred to him at 3 in the morning or any other hour to walk into something serious without her. He knelt at the hearth and threw the powder and put his head into the green fire, and the cold of the flue washed over his face, and he called her name into the flames of her own sitting room across the city. She answered on the second call. She always answered. She came to the fire in a dressing gown with a book still open in one hand and her hair loose around her shoulders, and she took one look at his face in the coals and closed the book. "What's wrong?" she said, not a question. She had known him too long to phrase it as a question. "I don't know yet. Sirius wants us both at Grimmauld Place. He says the house is in danger. He says we're not." He hesitated. He sounded strange, Hermione. He didn't make a single joke. That, more than anything, moved her. She was gone from the fire before he finished, and by the time he had pulled his coat on and stepped out into the corridor, she was apparating onto the front step of Number 12, book abandoned, wand in her hand, and he arrived a half-second behind her with the crack of his own apparition still ringing off the black railings. The street was empty and orange under the lamps. The house did not look, from the outside, like a house that was in any danger at all. It looked the way it always looked, tall and narrow and disapproving, squeezed sullenly between its neighbors who did not know it was there. But the fanlight over the door was glowing a color Harry had never seen come out of that house, a deep marine gold, and when Hermione put her hand flat against the door, she drew it back at once and looked at her palm. "It's warm," she said. "Harry, the door is warm. Wood doesn't do that." The door opened before either of them could knock. Creature stood in the gap with a lit taper held up in one gnarled fist, and he did something that stopped Harry cold on the threshold. He bowed. Not the grudging fold at the waist he gave to guests he despised, not the theatrical scrape he had used for years to make his contempt into a performance. He went down low, both hands spread, his forehead nearly to the boards, in the old deep courtesy of a house elf to the blood of the house, and he held the bow, trembling, until Harry, bewildered, said, "Creature, get up, you'll hurt your back," and the elf rose and looked at him with wet, enormous eyes and said, "The young master is kind to Creature. The young master does not yet know what he is." "What I am," Harry repeated. "Come and see," said Sirius from the top of the stairs. "Both of you, come up. And mind the third step. It's decided to be temperamental tonight, along with everything else in this bloody house." They came up into the drawing room and stopped, and for a while none of them said anything at all, because the tapestry had made speech feel small. It filled the long wall floor to ceiling, and it was alive with cold light, the whole vast genealogy of the House of Black glowing and breathing, names surfacing and sinking, branches that had been dead a century putting out new gold shoots that reached and groped across the wool, searching for something they could smell but not see. The air of the room hummed. Harry could feel it in his back teeth, in the fillings his aunt had never wanted to pay for, a low chord too deep to hear. Hermione approached any large problem in the same manner, and she approached this one no differently. Chin up, eyes moving fast, hands clasped behind her back so she wouldn't touch what she didn't understand. "It's rewriting itself," she said. "Sirius, it's actively rewriting. These aren't just illuminating, look, this branch here, this severed line, it's regrowing. The magic is adding names that were never woven. That's not possible. Genealogical tapestries record, they don't research." "This one does more than record," Sirius said. He had put on a proper coat and combed his hair back, and he stood by the cold hearth with his arms folded, and in the shifting light he looked, for a moment, exactly like the aristocrat he had spent his whole life refusing to be, the last lord of an old and terrible house, and then he grinned his crooked grin and the resemblance broke and he was just serious again, Harry serious, and the room was easier for it. "Sit down," he said, "both of you. This is going to take a while, and I'd rather you were sitting when the world tips over." They sat. Creature brought tea, 3 cups on a silver tray gone soft with tarnish, and set it down and did not leave. He took up a station by the wall beneath the burning names and stood there with his hands folded, watching the 2 young people on the sofa with that same unbearable hope, and Harry found he could not quite meet the old elf's eyes. "You know what the House of Black is," Sirius began, "or you think you do. Oldest of the old, pure as poison, half the graveyards in wizarding Britain full of us, Towger's purr carved over every mantle like a threat. That's the story the family told about itself for the last 300 years, and it's a lie, and it's the most important lie you'll ever have to understand, so pay attention." He picked up his own cup and did not drink from it. "The House of Black is not a family, not at its root, it's a guardianship. There's a thing under all of this, older than the name, older than any of us. We call it the Heart of Black. My grandfather called it that, and his grandfather, back and back. It's a well of old magic, deep magic, the kind that predates wands and the ministry and probably predates the statute of secrecy by a good long stretch. The first blacks weren't lords, they were keepers. They swore an oath to hold the heart, to tend it, to keep it from anyone who'd try to own it. And in return, the heart gave the house its strength, its long life, its terrible bloody stubbornness. He looked at the tapestry. Somewhere along the way, the keepers decided they'd rather be kings. They decided the strength was theirs by right and not by service, and they built a wall of blood around it. Pure blood. Only the pure could tend the heart, they said. Only the pure could inherit. And they burned every name that married out, cut every branch that wasn't pure enough, until the tree you're looking at was the whole world to them, and everything outside it was dirt. His voice had gone flat and cold. That's the lie, Tauger's purr, always pure. It was never about purity. It was about who gets to hold the power, and they dressed it up in blood so no one would ask the older question. Which is, Hermione said quietly. She had leaned forward, cup untouched, and there was in her face the particular stillness she got when she had walked into a library she did not know the size of. Who is the heart willing to be held by, said Sirius. Because here's the thing they forgot or chose to forget. The heart chooses, it always chose. The oath goes both ways. A keeper doesn't take the heart takes a keeper. And for 300 years the family's been shoving pureblood sons at it and calling whichever one didn't die the heir, and the heart's been getting quieter and quieter and angrier because none of them were what it wanted. It wanted keepers, they kept giving it kings. He set his cup down. I'm the last of the recognized line, last black sun standing more or less once you cross off the ones in Azkaban and the ones in the ground. By their law the whole thing falls to me, the vaults, the seat on the Wisengamot, the guardianship, the heart. And I've spent my whole life refusing it because I looked at what the guardianship had made of my family and I wanted no part of holding that whip. So I let it rot. I thought if I just let the name die with me, the whole rotten business would end and the heart could go back to sleep. But it's not going back to sleep, Harry said, looking at the wall. No, Sirius said, it's waking up. And I think it's my fault. I think by refusing it so long I've made a space, a vacancy, and the heart doesn't like a vacancy. Nature abhors one and old magic abhors it worse. It's been reaching these last months, casting about the whole bloodline for someone it can hold. And tonight, he said, gesturing at the two burning names on the wall, Eola high on her severed branch, Doria curling toward the Potter arms, tonight it found two. Harry looked at the name Doria for a long time. It was a strange thing to be handed a piece of yourself at 20 by a wall in the middle of the night. He had spent his whole life being told what he was by other people. The chosen one, the savior of the wizarding world, his father's son, his mother's eyes, a symbol, a weapon, a headline. He had learned young to hold all of it at arm's length, to let the names other people needed him to wear slide off him, because if he had believed even half of them, he would have gone mad or worse. And here was another name, older than any of them, coming up out of the dark on a wall in a house he had inherited from a godfather who hated it, and he waited for it to feel like the others, like a costume the world was pressing on him, and it did not. It felt instead like a key turning in a lock he had not known was there. Guardian, keeper. Not a thing done to him or expected of him or demanded from him, but a thing he apparently already was, quietly in the blood without anyone watching, the one true thing about himself that no one had ever thought to sell to a newspaper. He turned it over in the dark of his chest and found to his own surprise that he did not want to hold it at arm's length at all. He knew distantly, the way you know the shape of a country you've never visited, that his father's family were old. Potters went back. There was money he'd never asked about, and a name that opened doors he'd never wanted opened, and a vault at Gringotts he mostly pretended he didn't have. But he had never thought of himself as connected to this, to the black wall and the burning tree and the poison motto, and he found the connection sat strangely in his chest, a weight where there had been open space. That's my great-grandmother, he said. It was not a question, but he wanted it confirmed, the way you press a bruise to be sure. Doria Black, Sirius said more gently now. Married Charles Potter 90-odd years ago. She was by the family's lights. She married down, married soft, married a man who was kind, which they'd have counted a defect. They tolerated it. The Potters were pure enough to keep her name off the fire, but she took her black blood out of the trunk and into the branches, and it ran down quiet through her son, through his son. He met Harry's eyes across the humming room, through your dad, into you. You've got the blood of the Guardians in you, Harry, and you never knew it, and neither did anyone else, because who'd think to look for the House of Black inside Harry Potter, of all people? You've been the most watched person in Britain for 20 years, and the one true thing about you nobody ever noticed. Harry did not say anything. He was aware of Hermione beside him, very close, her shoulder nearly at his, and he was aware that she had gone still in a different way, and when he turned his head she was not looking at his name on the wall, she was looking at Ola's. Hermione, he said. Ola Black, she said. Her voice had gone careful and precise, the voice she used to hold something steady. Sirius, this branch, the one that's regrowing, you said the heart cast about the whole bloodline, but this line was severed, she married out. A muggle, the tapestry says, that branch should be dead, there's no wizarding descent, they'd have left the magical world entirely, the children would have been squibs, most like, Sirius said. Or nothing at all, muggles, that's why they burned her off with such relish. She didn't just marry beneath them, she took the blood out of the world, gave it to the dirt, as they'd have said. Viola Black married a muggle called Hitchens and vanished into London 140 years ago, and the family scorched her name and toasted her death and never thought about her again. He watched Hermione's face. Why do you ask? Hermione did not answer at once. She had risen from the sofa without seeming to decide to, and she crossed to the wall and stood before the regrowing branch with her head tipped back, reading the gold names surfacing one by one out of the dark below Iola's, the names the weavers had never written because they had been muggles, unworthy, forgotten, a line of them a descent, coming up now into the light because the heart of Black had reached down into the dirt where they had thrown it and found, at the bottom, something it wanted. Hitchens, she said. My grandmother's maiden name was Hitchens, my mum's mother, Grandma Jean. She used to say the family had been in London forever, that there'd been a great scandal once, a girl who ran off and married for love and got cut off without a shilling, and it was all very romantic and very sad and nobody knew the details because it was so long ago. Her hand came up, not quite touching the wall. She used to say we had witch's blood, as a joke. When I got my letter, she cried and said, I knew it, I always knew it. My grandmother said it, and I thought she was mad. Hermione's voice did something then that Harry had heard from her perhaps 3 times in 7 years. It thinned. It wasn't a joke, serious. It wasn't a scandal and a shilling. It was this. She ran off and married for love, and they burned her name off a wall and told each other she was dead. The gold letters kept surfacing beneath Iola's, generation by generation, the whole hidden descent of a cast-out daughter's line, coming up through the black wool toward the bottom of the tapestry where, at the very last, in fresh gold that had never in the history of the House of Black touched that wall, 2 names finished themselves. Hermione, and beside it, joined to it by a bright new thread the weave itself had spun, Harry. The room was very quiet. Even the low cord under the floor seemed to have hushed, waiting. Harry stood and went to stand beside her at the wall, close, and he did not say anything clever because there was nothing clever to say, and he had learned long ago that when the ground opened under Hermione, the most useful thing he could do was not fall in after her but stand at the edge with a hand out. He did not touch her. He waited until she looked at him, and when she did he saw that her eyes were bright and her jaw was steady, and she was already 3 moves ahead of her own shock, already turning it into a question. 2 names, she said to Sirius, not taking her eyes off Harry. The heart found 2, not one heir, 2. 2, Sirius agreed. And it's woven them together. Look at the thread. It didn't just surface us, it joined us. She turned back to the wall, and her scholar's steadiness returned to her like a tide coming back in. That's not how genealogy works. Genealogy branches. It doesn't braid. Whatever this magic is, it isn't recording a marriage because we're not married. It's recording something the heart intends. It's showing us a shape it wants to make. She looked at Sirius sharply. You said the heart takes a keeper. Why would it take 2? I don't know, Sirius said, and it was clear that the not knowing cost him something, because he was a man who liked to have answers ready to hand the way other men like to have their wands. The stories are old, and half of them are lies the family told to make itself look better. But there's a phrase in the oldest of them, in the founding rites, that I never understood as a boy and hated too much to study as a man. Sovereignty is not held in one hand, that's what they say. The oldest keepers came in pairs, apparently, a bound pair, 2 who chose each other freely outside the blood and held the heart between them so that no single hand could ever close on it and make it a weapon. He shook his head. It got bred out. The pureblood lot didn't like the freely part or the chose each other part or any of it. They wanted heirs they could arrange and control, so they made it 1 son, 1 heir, 1 hand, and the heart's been off balance ever since, held in 1 fist. Getting angrier, and now it's reaching back for the old shape, Hermione said slowly. A pair, 2 lines it cast out for the crime of choosing love over blood. Mine, from a woman who married a muggle for love, and Harry's, from a woman who married a soft, kind man they thought beneath her. And it's braiding them back together because that's the shape it was always meant to hold. She pressed the heel of her hand briefly against her forehead. This is the most magnificent piece of old magic I have ever seen, and I do not have a single book that will help me, and I want to scream. Harry laughed. He couldn't help it. It came out of him rough and surprised, and it broke the terrible weight in the room, and Sirius's grin flashed back, and even creature against the wall made a small creaking sound that might, in an elf 100 and some years old, have been the beginning of a smile. There she is, Harry said. 2 minutes ago the wall told you you're secretly the heir of an ancient magical dynasty, and you're already annoyed you don't have the reading list. It's a legitimate frustration, Hermione said, but the corner of her mouth had lifted, and she bumped her shoulder against his arm once, the small old gesture that had meant we're all right between them since they were 13, and he bumped back, and for a moment the House of Black and its heart and its burning wall were very far away, and there were only the 2 of them at the foot of a great strange tree that had, against every law of the world, written their names together in gold. Then Sirius said, there's more, and it's the part I hate, so let me get it out. He crossed to the window and looked down into the orange street, and when he spoke again his voice had the flatness that Harry had learned to be afraid of, because it meant Sirius had stopped performing and was telling the truth without any rapping on it. You're not the only ones who felt the heart wake tonight, he said. The black magic runs in more than 2 lines. It runs in the recognized ones too, the pure ones, the ones who never got burned off because they married exactly as they were told. Narcissa's line, Bellatrix's before Azkaban ate her, half the old families have a drop of it, and every one of them felt what you felt tonight, felt the well fill up and start reaching, and every one of them wants it, not to keep Harry, to hold, to own, to point. He turned. 3 days ago, before any of this lit up, before the wall did anything, a claim was filed in the Wisengamot, filed against me. Lucius Malfoy, acting for the House of Malfoy in the interests of the Sacred 28, has petitioned the court to have the guardianship in the seat and the vaults of the House of Black declared vacant on grounds of, I have it word for word, I've read it enough, the manifest failure of the current holder to maintain the dignity, continuity, and purity of the line. Purity, Hermione said, and the word came out of her like a blade drawn. Purity, Sirius agreed. They want it declared that I'm unfit, that a blood traitor who ran off to live with a werewolf and named a half-blood his heir has forfeited the line, and that the guardianship should pass to the senior recognized branch, which is Narcissa, which is, in practice, Draco. Which is, in absolute practice, Lucius, holding the whole thing in trust for a son he can steer, until he's got both hands around the heart of black and every ounce of old magic in it. He looked at them both. He filed 3 days early, before the wall lit, before there was anything to claim, which means he knew, which means he could feel it coming or someone told him it was coming, and he moved to have the court hand him the whole inheritance before the heart could choose for itself. His mouth twisted. He's not stupid, Lucius, he never was. He knows exactly what's under this house, and he knows that if the choosing is left to old magic instead of to a courtroom, he loses, so he's racing to get to a courtroom first. Harry looked from Sirius to the wall, to the 2 gold names braided at the bottom of the tree, to Creature standing beneath them with his old face lifted in hope, and he felt the shape of the next months arrange itself in front of him with the cold clarity he got before a fight he could not walk away from. So he wants a court to give him something that isn't his, Harry said, and the only thing that can stop him is proof that it's ours, real proof. Not a wall lighting up in the middle of the night that no judge will ever see. He looked at Sirius. There's a way, isn't there? You wouldn't have dragged us here in the dark to show us a problem you didn't already have half a plan for. There's a right. Sirius smiled, and it was not the crooked grin. It was something older and sadder and prouder, the smile of a man watching a thing he had feared to hope for come true anyway. There's a right, he said, the right of recognition. The oldest law of the house, older than the courts, older than the ministry, older than the lie of purity. It's how keepers were named before the family made it about blood. You go down under the house, down into the ancestral seat, to the obsidian hall where the heart burns, and you offer it your blood and your name and your intent, and it reads you, all of you, blood and worth and will. And if you're what it wants, it says so, in a way that cannot be argued with and cannot be forged and cannot be bought in front of any witness you care to bring. He spread his hands. A Wisengamot can hand Lucius Malfoy a piece of parchment. It cannot hand him the heart of black. Only the heart can do that, and I don't think the heart's going to. And if we're not what it wants, Hermione said, trust her to ask it. Trust her to walk to the edge and look down before she stepped. Sirius's smile did not waver. Then it won't say so, and you'll have lost nothing but a night, and I'll find another way to keep Lucius's hands off it, because I've kept them off it for 20 years, and I'm good at it. He came away from the window and stood in front of them, and he put a hand on Harry's shoulder, and after a moment, one on Hermione's, and the burning wall threw all 3 of their shadows huge against the ceiling. But I've seen that wall do a lot of things in my life, and I've never seen it braid 2 names in gold. It's not asking you to, it's already decided. All the right does is give it a mouth to say so. Outside, somewhere across the sleeping city, a clock struck 3, and the sound came thin and far through the glass. Creature moved beneath the tapestry and, with enormous care, reached up one long finger and touched the fresh gold of the 2 joined names and drew it back, and pressed the finger to his own forehead in a gesture so old that none of them had a word for it. The keepers come again, the old elf whispered. 2 who were cast into the dark, and the dark could not keep them. Creature has waited, Creature's mother waited, and her mother. The heart said, be patient, they will come, and Creature did not believe, and Creature is ashamed, and Creature is glad. He looked up at Harry and Hermione with his streaming enormous eyes. Will the young master and the young mistress go down to the heart? Will they let it look at them? Harry looked at Hermione. There was a question in it, the same question there had always been between them at every door worth walking through, the one they never bothered to say aloud anymore because the answer had stopped being in doubt somewhere around their 14th year. Are we doing this, and are we doing it together? She answered it as she always had. She reached down and took his hand, there in front of Sirius and the elf and the whole burning genealogy of a house that had spent 3 centuries teaching itself to hate everyone who did precisely that, and she laced her fingers through his and held on, and the thread of gold on the wall that joined their 2 names flared brighter, as if it had been waiting to see whether the weaving spoke true. Yes, Hermione said, we'll go down, we'll let it look. And under the floor, in the deep dark where the heart of black had burned low and lonely for 140 years, waiting through the long cold rain of purity for the pair it had lost. Something vast and old and patient turned over in its sleep and began at last to wake in earnest. Across the city, in a house where the silver was never allowed to tarnish, another man had felt the heart wake, and he was not glad. Lucius Malfoy sat in the dark of his study with the fire banked low and a single glass of something old and amber untouched at his elbow, and he watched the ring on his own hand. It was not a black ring. The Malfoys had never held the guardianship and never expected to. They had done better than that historically, by marrying into every house that did, and drinking a little of each one's power the way a clever vine drinks a wall. But there was black blood in the ring all the same, come down through Narcissa, and 3 hours ago the stone in it had grown warm against his finger and had stayed warm, pulsing faintly, in time with something he could not see and did not control, and Lucius Malfoy did not care for things he could not control. "It's woken then," said Narcissa from the doorway. She had not lit a candle. She stood in the dark in a pale dressing gown with her hair down, and there was in her posture something Lucius had learned to read over 20-odd years of marriage, a stillness that was not calm. She had been born a black. She felt the heart where he felt only its echo, and whatever it was doing tonight, it was doing it in her marrow, and her face in the firelight was that of a woman listening to a language she had been forbidden as a child and had never quite forgotten. "It's woken," Lucius agreed. "Sit, Sissa. You look as though the floor's moved. The floor has moved." She did not sit. "You filed the claim before it woke." "I filed the claim because it was about to wake." He turned the glass without drinking. "One does not wait for the storm to reach the harbor before one furls the sail. The old fool who calls himself Lord Black has spent 2 decades letting the line rot on the vine, and the moment the heart stirs it will begin casting about for a keeper, and it will not, I promise you, choose from among the people who taught it to hate. It will reach for the ones who were cast out. It always does when it's given the choice. That is precisely why the family stopped giving it the choice." He looked up at her. "So we do not give it the choice. We settle the matter in a court of law under the rules of recognized descent, where blood is a ledger and not a mystery, and the senior recognized branch inherits, and the senior recognized branch is your son." "Our son," Narcissa said. "Our son," Lucius allowed. Something moved behind his pale eyes that was not quite feeling and was not quite its absence. "Draco holds the seat. The vaults come to the family. And the guardianship, the heart itself, Sissa, 300 years of the deepest magic in Britain, comes into hands that know what to do with it. Steady hands, patient hands." He smiled, and it did not reach any part of his face that mattered. "I have been patient for a very long time." There was a sound at the study door, and a third person came into the dark, and he was young and pale, and there was a wariness in him that had not been there before the war and had never entirely left since. Draco Malfoy stood between his parents with his arms folded across his chest against a cold that was not in the room, and he looked at the warm ring on his father's hand, and then at his mother's still white face, and then he said the thing that neither of them had said aloud. "It's the Potter one, isn't it?" Draco said. "That's why you're both sitting in the dark like the pair of you have seen a Grim." It felt them. The blood traitor's godson. It reached for him. "It reached for a Potter," Lucius said with distaste, "who is, through some ancient indignity, a great-grandson of Doria Black, yes, among others." He set the glass down at last precisely in the exact center of the ring it had left on the wood. "It does not signify, Draco. What the heart wants and what the law grants are 2 different matters, and only one of them has ever built a house or held a vault or seated a lord in the Wisengamot. We will meet him in a court, not a cavern. And in a court, my son, we do not lose." But when Draco had gone back up to bed, and when Narcissa had at last consented to sit, and when the fire had burned lower still, Lucius Malfoy sat alone with the warm ring pulsing on his hand, and he took from a locked drawer a single sheet of very old parchment, black-edged, that had come to him a week before from a source he had not named even to his wife, and he read again the 4 lines written on it in a hand that no living man had penned. He did not know who had sent it. He knew only that it had told him the heart would wake before the heart woke, and that it had been right, and that it promised him a crown that a courtroom could never grant if he would only, when the hour came, bring the son of the pure line down into the dark and let something older than the Malfoys and older than the Blacks fit the crown upon that pale young head. He should have burned it. He was a cautious man, and it was a dangerous thing to keep, and everything in his long training told him to feed it to the fire. He locked it back in the drawer instead and turned the key and sat a while longer in the dark, listening to the ring, and did not sleep. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, the right of recognition. They did not go down that night. Sirius forbade it, and for once in his life he was immovable on a point of caution. "You don't walk into the oldest magic in Britain sleepless and rattled and running on creatures' tea," he said in the gray of the small hours, herding them both toward the guest rooms. "The heart's waited 140 years. It can wait 3 days more while we do this properly, which means witnesses, which means law, which means, Merlin help me, being organized, and I'll thank neither of you to remind me how much I hate it." So they slept, or tried to, in a house that hummed beneath them like a struck bell, and in the morning they set about the work of doing a legend properly. The work, it turned out, was Hermione's, and she took to it with the fierce, methodical joy of a woman handed the exact problem she was built for. She spent 2 days in the Black Library, a long, dim room that had frightened lesser scholars into fainting, and that received her instead as a supplicant it had been waiting for, books sliding themselves off shelves into her hands, a locked case of the founding rights unlocking at her touch when it had bitten 3 generations of pure-blood sons who tried to force it. By the second evening she had reconstructed the right of recognition out of 6 partial accounts, 4 of them deliberate forgeries meant to mislead thieves, and she stood in the drawing room under the still-burning tapestry and laid it out for the others like a barrister opening a case. The right is old and it is honest, she said, which is rare and which is the point. It cannot be cheated because it doesn't test anything a person can fake. It reads 3 things. Blood is the claimant of the line at all. Worth, this is the part the pure-blood era tried to strip out and couldn't because it's woven too deep, the part where the heart weighs what the claimant is, what they've done, what they'd do with power if they held it. And do they consent freely knowing the cost to be held, not to hold to be held? The oath runs the other way. She looked up from her notes. There is no incantation that produces a false result. There is no potion, no artifact, no bribe. The claimant offers blood, speaks their name and their intent, and the heart either answers or it doesn't. And the answer is witnessed by whoever stands in the hall to see it, and by the hall itself, which keeps its own record that no forger has ever managed to alter. She closed the book. It's the most incorruptible legal instrument I have ever read about. It's 1,000 years older than the Wisengamot. And Lucius Malfoy is going to hate it more than anything in his life, because there is not a single galleon's worth of leverage in it anywhere. Then we need someone in that hall no one can call a liar, Sirius said. That someone arrived on the 3rd morning, brought by Owl and by a favor Sirius had been saving 20 years to spend. Tiberius Ogden was very old and very upright, and had the sort of face that had spent a long life declining to be impressed. He had sat on the Wisengamot before most of its current members were born, had resigned from it once in protest over a matter of principle and been begged back, and was known throughout magical Britain by the one quality that made him useless to every faction and indispensable to the country. He could not be bought, leaned on, flattered, or frightened. He stood in the hall of Grimmauld Place with his hat still on and looked up the length of the burning tapestry with an expression of profound professional disapproval. I have spent 60 years keeping the register of the ancient houses, he said, and in all that time not one of them has ever done anything as vulgar as glow. What have you done to it, Black? Nothing, Sirius said. That's rather the trouble. Come and sit down, Tiberius, and let a mudblood and a half-blood explain to you why everything your register says about the House of Black is wrong. Ogden's white eyebrows climbed. But he came and sat and he listened, and he was, whatever else, a man who could recognize the difference between a swindle and a truth. And by the time Hermione had finished, and the tapestry behind her had spelled out the 2 braided names in gold for him to see, the old man had taken off his hat and set it on his knee and was looking at Harry and Hermione with the wary respect of a man who has spent his whole career administering the letter of a law and has just been shown its heart. I will witness it, he said. Understand what that means. I will not lie for you. If the heart of Black does not answer, I will say so in open Wisengamot, and your claim dies that hour. But if it does, he turned the hat slowly in his old hands, if it does, then I am obliged by an oath I swore before your fathers were born, to record what I see and to defend the record with my name. And my name, I will tell you without false modesty, is worth a great deal in that chamber. He fixed Sirius with a pale eye. You have made me part of your quarrel, Black. I hope for all our sakes the old magic knows its own mind, because I am too old to be made a fool of. The last of the party came without being summoned. Andromeda Tonks stood on the step of number 12 on the 3rd evening with her granddaughter's toddler on her hip and her back very straight, and when Sirius opened the door she looked at him for a long moment, cousin to cousin, 2 people who had each in their turn been burned off the same wall. I felt it, she said, 3 nights ago. I was giving Teddy his supper and the whole world tilted, and I sat down on the kitchen floor with a spoon in my hand, and I could not tell you why I was weeping. Her chin lifted, it reached for me too, Sirius, for a moment, and then it went past me to something younger and stronger and better matched, and I was glad, I was so glad because I never wanted it, and I have spent my whole adult life being grateful they threw me out. She stepped over the threshold. But it reached for me, which means I have standing, which means when the Wisengamot tries to say that no cast-out daughter's blood counts, I can stand up and say that the heart of Black knows my name. So I'm coming down with you, Andromeda, born Black, disowned, and not the least bit sorry. Someone in that chamber ought to be able to say she chose this with her eyes open. Hermione crossed the hall and took Teddy from her without being asked, settling the drowsy child against her shoulder, and Andromeda looked at the young woman holding her grandson under the wall that had just restored her own family's stolen names, and something in the older woman's face eased that had not been eased in 30 years. You have her look, Andromeda said quietly. Viola's. There's a portrait of her in the deep gallery, the one they never got round to burning because they'd forgotten she had won. You'll see it tonight, you have her exact stubborn chin. Good, said Hermione, and did not trust herself to say more. The way down was not stairs. Creature led them to the base of the great house, to a cellar that had no business being as large as it was, and there in the far wall, behind a rack of bottles that had turned to dust inside their glass, was a door of black stone with no handle and no lock and no hinge, and on it, cut deep and filled with old silver gone the color of the moon, was the crest of the House of Black. 3 ravens and a sword and a single star, and beneath it the motto that had ruled the family for 300 years and that Harry now knew to be a lie. Sirius put his hand flat against the star. Nothing happened. It won't have me, he said without surprise, and there was in his voice an old, worn grief that had stopped being sharp a long time ago. It never has. I'm the recognized heir by their law, and the door's known better than the law since I was 15. Go on, Harry, both of you, together. That's what it wants. Harry looked at Hermione. She shifted Teddy back into Andromeda's arms, and she came to stand beside him at the black door, and without discussion they each raised a hand and pressed a palm to the cold stone, hers over the sword, his over the ravens, and Harry felt the star between their 2 hands grow warm and then hot, and then the door remembered them. It did not open. It simply was not there, and then there was a stair going down, cut from the same black stone, descending into a dark that had a texture to it, a density, the dark of a place that had never once in its existence known the sun. A wind came up out of it that smelled of cold water and old iron and faintly, absurdly, of wood smoke. The ghost of some fire kept burning far below through every year of the long neglect. They went down. The stair went down farther than London had any right to allow. The walls, at first close and rough, drew back as they descended until the sound of their footsteps stopped returning at all, and they walked through a blackness so complete that Harry could not see the woman at his side. Only feel her hand find his in the dark and hold it, and he held back, and they went down together into the deep of the earth with the 2 old people and the old elf and the sleeping child behind them, and no one spoke, because there are places that make speech feel like blasphemy. And this was the throat of one of them. The stair broke at a landing none of them had expected, a long low chamber opening off the descent, and here a light did wake, a soft one, sconces of pale blue fire kindling down the length of the walls as the party stepped in, and by that light they saw that the chamber was a gallery, and that the gallery was full of faces, portraits. Rank on rank of them hung frame to frame down both long walls, and Hermione understood what they were before Andromeda said it, because every single frame had been scorched. The gilt was blackened. Some of the canvases had been slashed and mended by no human hand. These were the cast out, the burned off, the daughters and sons the family had struck from the wall upstairs and thought it had erased, and they had not been erased at all, only exiled, carried down into the dark and hung here in a gallery no pure-blood son had ever been permitted to find, because the heart had refused to let them go. They kept them, Andromeda breathed. She had gone very still with Teddy on her hip, all these years. They burned us off the tapestry and toasted our deaths, and they never destroyed the portraits. The heart wouldn't let them, it kept them, down here, in the one place the family was too frightened to go. She walked slowly down the gallery, reading the little blackened plates. Marius Black, who was born without magic and cast out for it. Cedrella, who married a Weasley. All of them. Every name they ever burned, it kept every one. At the far end of the gallery, in a frame the fire had barely touched, a woman sat with her chin lifted and her dark eyes bright and impatient, dressed in the fashion of a century and a half gone, and beneath her the blackened plate read only IOLA, and she looked out of her canvas at the party coming down the gallery toward her and found the young woman among them and stopped being a painting and became a person, sitting up sharp, one hand pressed to the glass. You, said the portrait of Viola Black. You've got the look of my Bob about the eyes, and the black chin, poor thing, there's no escaping the chin. Are you mine after all this time? Have they finally sent me one of my own? Hermione came and stood before her many times great-grandmother, and whatever she had meant to say did not come, and instead she pressed her own hand to the glass over the painted one, and the 2 hands matched, the same stubborn set to them across 140 years, and the painted woman's fierce eyes filled. Love, Ola said, that is what they wrote under my name before they burned it, married a muggle, as if it were a crime, as if it were the worst thing a black could do. Her painted chin came up. It was the best thing I ever did, girl, and I would do it again, and I would let them burn me off their wall 1,000 times over. If the heart has finally chosen the children of the ones we loved instead of the ones they arranged, then I have not sat in this dark for nothing. Go down, let it look at you. And come back and tell me, do you hear? Come back and tell an old woman she was right. I will, Hermione said. I promise I will. Harry stood beside her in the blue light of the gallery of the cast-out, among the faces of everyone the House of Black had ever thrown away for the crime of loving where they chose. And he took Hermione's hand again, and they went on down out of the gallery and back onto the black descending stair. And the pale blue sconces guttered out behind them one by one as they left, the exiles sinking back into their long, patient dark, but easier now, all of them, because one of their own had come home. Then far below a light, It was not much at first, a smear of blue against the black, and then as they descended it resolved into an arch, an enormous pointed arch of that same obsidian stone. And beyond the arch the stair gave out onto a floor, and Harry stepped off the last black step and out under the arch and stopped, and Hermione stopped beside him. And even Tiberius Ogden, who had spent 60 years declining to be impressed, made a low sound in his throat and took off his hat. They stood in the obsidian hall. It was vast beyond the sense a mind could make of it. The floor was black glass, polished to a depth that gave back the ceiling, so that they seemed to stand on the surface of a still black lake with a sky beneath their feet, and the sky beneath their feet was full of stars, because the ceiling far overhead was not stone at all but a vault of true night, a dome of dark shot through with slow-wheeling constellations that answered no season and no hemisphere Hermione could name, and she named a great many. Columns of black stone rose the height of a cathedral and were lost in the dark before they reached the stars. Along the walls, ranked in the gloom, stood hundreds of statues, the founders and keepers of the house carved life-sized in obsidian, and set into the breast of each one was a single point of pale light, so that the hall was ringed with a slow procession of watching stars. Hermione had read about places like this and had never once believed the accounts, because the accounts were always written by people who had clearly lost their scholarly nerve, resorting to the language of cathedrals and oceans because ordinary measurement had failed them, and she had marked such passages in the margins of a dozen books with the single dry word exaggeration. She took the word back now, silently, all dozen of them. There was no exaggerating this. The hall did not obey the rules a built thing obeyed. It was too large for the headland it sat under and too old for the stone it was cut from, and the wheeling constellations overhead answered no astronomy she knew, and yet moved with a slow inevitability that felt less like decoration than like a clock, the hall keeping time by a calendar that had begun before there were years to count. She had spent her whole life being the person in the room who understood how things worked, and she stood now in a place she did not understand at all, and instead of the fear she might have expected, what rose in her was something closer to reverence, the particular hush of a mind meeting a thing genuinely larger than itself and for once choosing to kneel to it rather than solve it. And at the center of the hall, on a dais of 7 black steps, stood 2 things. The first was a throne. It was carved from a single mass of the black stone, and it was not ornate. It had no jewels, no gilding, no arms wrought into serpents or wings. It was severe and enormous and simple, and it was the simplicity of it that made it terrible, the way a mountain is terrible, and above it, cut into the stone of the backrest and filled with silver, was the single star of the house. Hermione understood without being told that this was the seat of stars, the seat of the keeper, and that no one living had sat in it in 140 years, and that it was waiting. The second thing was the heart. It hung in the air above the throne, unsupported at the height of a tall man's reach, and it was a flame, and it was a star, and it was neither. It was a knot of fire that gave off no heat and cast no shadow, and its light was black, not the absence of light, but a light that was somehow dark, a radiance the color of the space between stars, so that to look at it directly was to feel the eye strain toward a color it had no name for and could not hold. It turned slowly on itself, it breathed. As they came into the hall it had been low, guttering, a coal banked under ash. But as Harry and Hermione stepped out from under the arch it flared once, a great slow pulse of that impossible dark radiance that swept out across the black glass floor and broke over the two of them like a wave, and every pale star set in the breast of every obsidian founder along the walls flared with it, so that for one endless moment the whole vast hall drew breath, and the breath was aimed at them. Creature made a sound that was half a sob and went down on his knees on the black glass. "It knows you," he whispered. "It has been so long, and it is so tired, and it knows you. Oh, Creature lived to see it. Creature's mother did not, and her mother did not, and they told Creature be patient, and Creature did not believe, and here they are, and the heart is glad." "Steady," said Ogden, but his own voice was not steady, and the old man had put one hand on a column to hold himself upright, and his pale register-keeper's eyes were wide in the dark. "Steady all. This is not yet anything a court will hear. A house may love whom it pleases. The law wants proof it can write down. Do the right, do it exactly. I am watching, and I will remember every word." Andromeda had gone to the foot of the dais with Teddy asleep against her, and she was looking up at the heart with tears standing on her face and making no move to wipe them, and Sirius came and stood beside his cousin, the two disowned blacks together at the foot of the throne that had cast them both out, and he put his arm around her shoulders, and neither of them said anything at all. Hermione had the right by memory, but she had written it out regardless on good parchment, because she did not intend for the most important legal instrument of her life to depend on nerves. "There are 3 offerings," she said, and her scholar's voice held steady in the enormous dark, and Harry stood close at her shoulder and let her steadiness be the thing he answered to. "Blood, name, and will, we each offer our own. And then this is the part the forgeries all left out, the part only the true founding right includes, we offer together. Because the heart isn't choosing a keeper, it's choosing a bond. It wants to know that the two hands it means to be held in are willing to be joined. She looked at him then, and there was a question in it that was older than tonight and that she had never once asked him aloud, and she asked it now only with her eyes, and Harry answered it the only way that mattered, which was that he did not look away. Together, he said, whatever it wants. I'm not doing any of this without you, Hermione. I never have. That's not a right talking. That's just true. She held his gaze one moment longer. Then she turned to the throne and she lifted her chin, Iola's chin, Andromeda had said, the exact stubborn set of it, and she began. She drew the silver knife creature had carried down, and she pricked her own thumb, and she let 3 drops fall onto the topmost of the 7 black steps, and she spoke her name into the dark. Hermione Jean Granger, daughter of the daughters of Iola Black, whom this house cast into the dark for the crime of loving where she chose. I come by blood, I come by will. I do not ask to hold you, I offer to be held, I know the cost, I consent. The 3 drops of blood did not spread on the black stone. They gathered, drew together, and sank, and where they vanished a thread of that dark radiance came up out of the step and climbed the air toward the heart, and the heart bent toward it, and along the walls 100 obsidian founders turned their carved heads, slow as centuries, to look at the woman on the steps. Then Harry. He took the knife from her hand, and his own blood fell beside hers on the black step, and he spoke, and his voice was not loud, but it filled the hall, because the hall wanted to hear him. Harry James Potter, son of the sons of Doria Black, whom this house let go quietly because it thought her harmless. I come by blood, I come by will, I don't want to hold you, I never wanted to hold anything. He drew a breath of the cold iron air. But I'll be held if being held means keeping this out of the hands of the people who'd make it a weapon. I know the cost, I consent. 3 drops sank into the stone beside hers, and a second thread of dark light climbed the air, and the 2 threads, rising, found each other and twined. And where they twined the heart flared a third time, brighter than before, so bright that the black radiance of it turned briefly, impossibly, to gold. A deep old gold like the last light before a storm, and the whole hall rang with it. A single vast sustained note that came up through the black glass and through the soles of their feet and into the roots of their teeth. And Hermione, who had spent 3 days telling everyone that this magic was incorruptible and honest and old, put her hand to her mouth and forgot, for a moment, every word she had ever read. Now the third, she managed. Together, give me your hand. He gave her his hand. She turned it palm up and laid her own palm up hand beside it, and drew the knife once across both at once, a single thin line of red crossing both their palms, and she pressed her cut hand to his, blood to blood, and laced her fingers through his, and held on, and together they lifted their joined hands toward the heart. And together they spoke the last words of the founding rite, the words the pure-blood centuries had tried to burn out of the world and had never quite managed to kill. Sovereignty is not held in one hand, they said. We come as 2 who chose each other. We come freely. We come together. Take us or refuse us, but you will not have one of us without the other, now or ever. And the heart of black came down. It descended from above the throne, slow, turning, the dark star sinking through the air toward their joined and lifted hands, and the cold of it was not cold and the light of it was not light. And Harry felt it the moment before it touched them, felt it look at him, felt it look through the scar on his forehead and the war behind his eyes and the cupboard under the stairs and the graveyard and the forest and every death he had walked toward without stopping, felt it weigh all of it, not judging, only knowing. And beside him he felt Hermione go rigid as it looked through her too, through every book and every burnt bridge and every time she had walked into fire because it was right and not because it was safe, and the heart weighed them both, blood and worth and will, and it found them enough. The dark star touched their joined hands and did not burn. It rested there in the cup of their 2 bleeding palms, weightless, and its impossible light ran up their arms and across their shoulders and settled over the both of them like a mantle, and every star in the vaulted ceiling brightened, and every star in the breast of every founder along the walls brightened, and the throne itself, the seat of stars, took on a low black glow, waking after 140 years to the presence of keepers it could at last acknowledge. A voice spoke in the hall. It did not come from any mouth. It came from the stone and the stars and the black glass underfoot, from the founders and the throne and the deep foundations of the earth, and it spoke in no language and every language, and afterward none of them could agree on the exact words, only on what it meant, which was this: found. After long dark found, 2 who were cast out, and the casting out was the proof, 2 who chose, and the choosing was the key. Blood I acknowledge, worth I have weighed, will I have heard. You are known to me, you are the true heirs of this house, and I will hold no other while you live and while you hold each other. Come and be crowned. Tiberius Ogden had fallen to his knees on the black glass without noticing that he had done it, and his old face was wet, and he was whispering over and over the way a man prays who had thought he had outgrown prayer. I witness. Before the founders and the stars, I witness, I witness, I witness. Andromeda was weeping openly into her grandson's hair. Sirius stood with his hand pressed over his mouth and his eyes shining, watching the godson he had raised and the young woman he loved like his own crowned in the black light of the thing his whole family had murdered itself to possess, and being held, being chosen, being wanted, not one of the blacks who had gone before them had ever once managed to be. And Harry and Hermione stood on the 7 black steps with the heart of black resting in their joined hands and its dark mantle across their shoulders. And they turned and looked at each other, and there was blood on both their palms and starlight on both their faces, and neither of them said anything because there was a whole language that had opened up between them in the last minute that had no words in it yet, and they were both, in that moment, content to leave it unspoken and simply hold on. That was when the cold came. It came from below. It came up through the black glass from somewhere far beneath even this deep hall, a breath of a different kind of dark, and where the heart's light was old and clean, this was old and rotten, and it slid across the floor of the obsidian hall like an oil slick across water, and the golden warmth in the heart guttered as it passed. The heart drew up out of their hands. It rose quickly now back to its place above the throne, and it flared not with welcome but with warning, a hard white pulse, and the founders along the walls turned their carved heads again, all of them at once, not toward Harry and Hermione this time, but downward, toward the black glass, toward the deep. "What is that?" Harry said. His hand had found his wand without his deciding it should. Creature had scrambled to his feet and put himself between the young keepers and the cold, his old body trembling, his ears flat to his skull. "The deep," the elf whispered. "Something in the deep is awake, something the heart cast down long ago, and it did not die. Elves know it did not die." Creature's mother said, "Do not go into the deep, do not, do not." He was shaking. "It feels the heart choosing. It has waited too, master. It has waited for a keeper as long as the heart has, and it hates that the heart has found one that is not its own." Under their feet, in the black glass that gave back the wheeling stars, something moved. Far down, deeper than the hall, deeper than the roots of the columns, a shape turned in the dark, vast, slow, half-seen. A paleness in the abyss, like a drowned crown catching a light that should not have reached it, and a voice came up through the stone that was not the heart's voice, that was thin and cold and terribly patient, and it did not speak in every language. It spoke in the old pure Latin of the family's proudest days, and it spoke only 2 words, and the 2 words climbed the black glass and hung in the enormous dark of the obsidian hall like frost forming on a windowpane. "Non digni, not worthy." Then it was gone, sunk back down into the deep, and the cold went with it, and the heart's warning pulse faded, and the hall was only a hall again, vast and dark and full of stars, and the 6 of them and the sleeping child stood on the black glass in the ringing silence and looked at one another with the understanding settling over them all that the recognition they had come for was one, and was witnessed, and was true, and was not, after all, the end of anything. Ogden got slowly to his feet. He put his hat back on, and the ordinary human gesture of it steadied them all, and he looked at Harry and Hermione for a long moment with his pale, unbribable eyes. "I have witnessed the right of recognition," he said formally, and his old voice did not shake now, "and I will so testify, before the Wisengamot and before any power in this land that cares to question me, that the heart of the House of Black has this night acknowledged Harry James Potter and Hermione Jean Granger as its true and chosen heirs, freely offered and freely taken, and that no claim of recognized descent stands against a claim the heart itself has spoken." He paused. "That is the good news, and it is very good, and it will win you your case in that chamber, I have no doubt of it now." His gaze went, briefly, to the black glass floor, to the deep beneath it, and the lines of his old face drew tight. "But I have kept the register of the ancient houses for 60 years, and I have read things in it that I did not repeat to the men who begged me back to that bench, and I know the name of what just spoke to you out of the deep, or I can guess it, and if I am right, then winning your case is going to be the smallest of the things you have to do." He turned toward the black arch and the long stair up. "Come, we climb. And on the way I will tell you what I fear, and you will not thank me for it, and it will still need saying." They gathered themselves. Sirius lifted Creature, who could not stop trembling, into his arms like a child, an act that would have unmade 100 years of the elf's masters had they lived to see it. Andromeda took Hermione's cut hand and, murmuring, sealed the cut with a touch and a word, and did the same for Harry, mothering them both without asking whether they wanted it, and they let her, because they were beginning to understand what she was to them now. They climbed. The dark closed over the light of the hall behind them, and for a while there was only the sound of 6 sets of feet on black stone and the old man's breathing, harder now on the ascent, and Harry stayed close at his elbow in case the stair proved unkind to a man of 90. It was Hermione who asked, because she could not ask, because a thing had spoken 2 words out of the abyss, and she would sooner walk toward a danger she understood than away from one she did not. "You said you know its name," she said. "The thing in the deep, you said you could guess it. Guess it out loud, Mr. Ogden. We've earned the truth, and I'd rather have it on the stair than in the courtroom." Ogden went on climbing for a dozen steps before he answered, and when he did his voice came low, pitched for them and not for the walls, unwilling to say the name too loudly in the house that had made it. "There is a gap in the register of the House of Black," he said. "One generation 400 years ago, where the line of succession makes no sense, where a lord is named and then unnamed, where the record was scraped clean and rewritten by someone who wanted a thing forgotten. I noticed it when I was young." Asked about it once of the last Black Lord who would still speak to me, your grandfather, serious and unpleasant man on his kindest day, and he went white to the lips and told me never to ask again, and I never did because I was younger then and more easily frightened, but I read what I could find. He climbed. There was a lord of this house 4 centuries gone, a younger son who should never have inherited and did, through a great deal of quiet murder. Cassius, his name was Cassius Black. And he was not content, as his fathers had been content, to hold the heart and be held by it in turn. He had a theory. He believed the whole arrangement was backward. He believed a keeper who could be refused by the thing he kept was no lord at all but a servant in a crown, and Cassius Black did not intend to serve. He intended to own. The cold seemed to follow them a little way up the stair. No one interrupted him. He tried to take the heart by force, Ogden went on. To bind it to his blood alone, to make it a possession that would pass to his sons whether the heart consented or not, to end forever the terrible democracy of the old right, in which any cast-out daughter's grandchild might prove worthier than a pure-blood lord. He built himself a crown to do it, not a crown of gold, a crown of the heart's own stolen light, wrought by a magic I will not describe because I do not fully understand it and would not teach it if I did. And when it was made, he set it on his own head in this very hall, and he commanded the heart of Black to acknowledge him its master. Ogden stopped on the stair and turned, and in the faint upward glow his old face was grim. The heart cast him down. It would not be owned. It burned the crown black, and it cast Cassius Black into the deep beneath the hall, into the dark under the dark, and it scraped his name from every record it could reach, and the family out of shame helped it, and that is the gap in my register. He drew a breath, but the heart could not unmake him entirely because he had bound a part of himself into the crown, and a crown made of stolen love does not die easily. He is down there still, 400 years, not alive, not dead. A hunger with a shape, waiting in the deep with a black crown in its hands, waiting for the one thing that could free it. A claimant, Harry said. His voice was flat in the dark. A pure-blood claimant, someone who believes exactly what he believed, that the heart is a thing to be owned. Someone who would put on the crown, Ogden said, and let Cassius Black finish, through them, the theft the heart interrupted 400 years ago. Yes, he resumed, climbing more slowly. And tonight the heart woke and chose, and after 400 years of silence there is a true crowning coming to this house, a real one the old rite performed in earnest. That, I fear, is precisely the kind of power the thing in the deep has been starving for. A crowning is a door. Cassius means to come through it, and he has just heard the heart call you worthy, and he has answered you out of 400 years of hunger with the only word he has left. The old man's mouth was a thin line, non-digny. Not worthy, he does not mean it as an insult, children. He means it as a promise. He intends to prove it. At the foot of the black stair, Harry stopped and looked back once, across the vast dark floor to the dais, to the empty throne and the heart burning low and patient above it, and it seemed to him that the dark star dimmed and brightened once as he looked, a slow, deliberate pulse, the nearest thing a well of ancient magic could manage to a promise or a farewell or the first word of a summons it had waited 140 years to speak. Come and be crowned, it had said. He found Hermione's hand in the dark of the stair, and she found his, and they climbed up out of the deep together toward the sleeping city and the courtroom and the enemies who did not yet know they had already lost the argument and would therefore have to be beaten some other way. And behind them and below them the heart of Black burned on in its hall of stars, and far beneath it in the deep the drowned pale crown turned over once more in the dark and settled and waited and did not sleep. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The Council of Cousins. The Daily Prophet had the story before the ink on Ogden's deposition was dry, and it got it wrong in 3 separate and revealing ways. Potter grabs for Black Gold ran the first headline above a photograph of Harry looking harassed on his own doorstep. The second edition, after the Malfoy camp had a night to work, softened it. Who shall hold the House of Black? A question of blood. By the third day it had become a running war of columns, one faction painting Harry as an upstart half-blood looting a dying dynasty, the other painting Lucius as a vulture circling a fortune, and neither of them, Hermione noted grimly over the breakfast table at Grimmauld Place, printing the one fact that actually settled the matter, which was that the heart of Black had already chosen and a Wisengamot elder had watched it happen. They can't print it, Sirius said. Half of them don't believe the heart exists, the other half believe it exists and would very much prefer it didn't have opinions. He tossed the paper aside. This was always going to be fought in the chamber, not the press. The press is just the weather. Ignore it. I can't ignore it, Hermione said, because the chamber is 50 people and 40 of them will have read nothing but the weather. She had 3 books open and a quill behind each ear. We are not going to win this by being right, Sirius. We are right, and being right is worth exactly 1 vote, Ogden's, and he was already ours. We win this by making it impossible for the undecided 40 to vote for Lucius without looking like exactly what they are, which means the law has to be airtight and the story has to be better than his. And Harry, she looked up, you are going to have to stand up in that chamber and be the thing they least expect, which is reasonable. I can be reasonable, Harry said. You can be reasonable when you're calm. You're going to be furious. Lucius is going to make certain of it. He's going to say things about your mother's blood and Sirius's choices and about me, and he's going to say them in that bored, precise voice designed to make you shout, because a Harry who shouts is a Harry who looks like exactly the reckless half-blood their headlines promised. She held his gaze across the table. Don't give it to him. Let me do the fighting with the law. You do the harder thing. You sit there and you be a man they could imagine bowing to. Can you do that for me? For you, Harry said, yes. They spent the 3 days before the hearing turning the Black Library into a war room, and the war room filled over those days with people. Molly Weasley arrived first, with food no one had asked for and comfort no one could refuse, and set about the practical business of making a haunted house habitable for a siege. Arthur came in the evenings, and Bill, whose curse breakers eye Hermione wanted for the older documents. Ron came and stayed, planting himself at the long table with a stack of Wisengamot procedural records, and the doggedness that had made him the finest strategist of them all when it came to board he could see. And if there was a night in the war, it was a moment ago that Ron and Hermione and Harry had all been 18 and unsure of what they were to one another. That moment was long resolved, and what was left was better and plainer. Ron loved them both, and he would break a Malfoy's argument to pieces for the joy of it, and he did not need to be anything other than their friend to do it. Ginny came, and Luna, who read the founding rites upside down and made 3 observations that Hermione wrote down and underlined twice. Neville came and turned out to know an alarming amount about the marriage customs of the Sacred 28 because his grandmother had made him learn them, and he recited genealogies that broke the Malfoy claim in 2 places while apologizing for boring everyone. It was Luna who said the thing that stayed with Hermione longest, and she said it near midnight, tracing a line of the founding rite that everyone else had read past. This word here, she said, tapping the old parchment. Everyone's been translating it as taken. The crown is taken, but it isn't quite taken. It's an old word, and it means received, which isn't the same at all. You can't take something that has to be received. Taking is a thing you do to a thing. Receiving is a thing that happens between 2 people who both agree. She looked up with her clear, pale eyes. That's why it goes wrong for the ones who reach for it, I expect. They keep trying to take a crown that can only be given. It's a bit like love, really. You can't grab it, someone has to hand it to you, and you have to be the sort of person they'd want to. She went back to her reading, humming. Hermione stared at the line for a long moment. Then she wrote received in the margin in her precise hand and underlined it twice and sat back, turning the distinction over. A thing you take against a thing you are given. It felt, she thought, like the sort of small key that opened a very large door, and she left the book open to that page and did not close it again all week. On the last evening, Minerva McGonagall arrived, and she did not offer to help with the law because she trusted Hermione to handle the law. She came instead and sat with Harry on the back step of the terrible old house while the others worked, and she said very little, and what she said Harry kept. They will try to make you small in that chamber tomorrow, she said. It is the oldest trick the old families have. They made me feel small in rooms like that for 50 years, a half-blood schoolmistress with no name to speak of, and I learned the answer to it late, and I will give it to you now for free. She looked out at the overgrown garden. You do not get bigger by shouting, you get bigger by being unbothered. A man who cannot be provoked is a man who has already decided he does not need their permission to exist. Decide that tonight, Potter, and go to bed, and let Miss Granger win the argument, because she is going to win it whether you fret or not. He did not sleep much regardless, and neither did Hermione, and some hour past midnight they gave up the pretense separately and found each other, as they always did, in the library, where she had lit a single lamp and spread the compact of 1712 across the table, and was reading it for the 9th time. He did not offer to help because he could not, and she did not send him away because she did not want him gone. He simply sat across from her and let the scratch of her quill and the turn of her pages be the sound the night was made of, and once, without looking up, she reached across the table and he took her hand and held it while she read, and that was all, and it was the thing that steadied both of them more than any speech from McGonagall. There would be a chamber in the morning and enemies and a room full of the old families waiting to make them small. But there was this first, the lamp and the books in her hand and his in the quiet, and Harry thought, watching her work, that whatever the House of Black turned out to be worth, it could not possibly be worth more than the ordinary miracle of being the person she reached for in the dark, and that if the whole thing burned down tomorrow, he would still count himself the richest man in Britain for that alone. The Wisengamot chamber was a pit of tiered benches under a vaulted stone ceiling, torchlit even at midday, and it had been built deliberately to make everyone in it feel judged. Harry had been in it before, on the wrong end of it at 15, and the memory of that was in the stone, and he let it be there and did not fight it. He sat where he was placed, in the low seat at the center of the floor, with Hermione beside him and Sirius and Andromeda behind, and he folded his hands and made himself still, and he watched the enemy file in. Lucius Malfoy had not aged so much as refined, the way a blade refines as it wears. He wore black and silver and no expression at all, and he took his place at the head of the claimant's bench with Draco beside him, and behind them ranged the Council of Cousins, the traditionalist bloc that had petitioned as one body, a dozen witches and wizards of the old houses, and Harry marked the two who mattered. The first was Corvin Knott, elderly, dry, a genealogist and a purist, the kind of man who had spent his life curating a museum of blood and genuinely believed the exhibits were alive. He would fight on the law, on the ledgers, on dissent, and he would fight cleanly by his own lights, and he was the more honest of the two. The second was Lady Belvina Burke, and she was the one to watch. She was perhaps 60, upright, beautifully dressed, with pale eyes and a stillness that did not read as calm. And when she came into the chamber, she paused at the top of the steps and looked down at Harry and Hermione across the whole width of the pit. And she looked at them too long, and there was in her look no anger and no contempt, only a cold and patient assessment, the look of a woman measuring a door for a key she already held. She inclined her head to them, courteous, terrible, and took her seat, and Hermione, beside Harry, went very still. "That one," Hermione murmured under the rising noise of the chamber filling. "Watch that one, not wants to win the case, she wants something else." Kingsley Shacklebolt took the high seat as presiding minister, and he was scrupulous and grave and made a point in his opening of reminding the chamber that he held no stake in the outcome and would enforce the forms without favor, and Harry believed him, and understood that Kingsley's neutrality was itself a kind of ally, because a fair fight was one they could win and a rigged one was not. The claim was read. It was Lucius's counsel who read it, a smooth young man named Travers, but it was Lucius's voice underneath every word. The House of Black stood without a recognized lord, in fact, its titular holder having renounced the dignity of the line in all but name. The guardianship, the ancestral seat, the vaults, and the Wisengamot seat should therefore pass under the ancient law of recognized descent to the senior surviving branch of pure and unbroken blood, which was the line of Narcissa, born black, and thence to her son Draco. And any competing claim founded upon irregular descent through disowned or diluted lines was, by the settled law of 3 centuries, void. The petitioners will observe, Travers concluded, that the opposing claim rests entirely upon an alleged event witnessed by a single elderly gentleman in a cellar. We do not dispute Mr. Ogden's sincerity. We dispute that the private enthusiasms of a family artifact, unrecorded in any register, unexamined by this court, can be permitted to overturn 300 years of the settled law of blood. The House of Black has always passed by descent. It must pass by descent now. Anything else is not inheritance. It is theft dressed in mysticism. There was a murmur of agreement from the traditionalist benches, and from a good many of the undecided 40, and Harry felt the room tilt toward Lucius, and he kept his hands folded and his face unbothered, and he waited for Hermione to stand. She let the murmur run a moment, then she rose, and she did not hurry, and she set a single sheet of parchment on the rail in front of her and did not look at it, because she had it by heart. "The petitioner says the House of Black has always passed by descent," Hermione began. "That is true. I would like to tell the chamber how far back always goes, because the petitioner has been careful not to." She looked up at the tears. "The law of recognized descent, the primogeniture of pure blood that council calls the settled law of 3 centuries, is exactly that, 3 centuries old. I have the enabling instrument here, the Black Family Compact of 1712, sealed by Lord Phineas the Elder, and I invite Mr. Knott, who knows the family records better than any man living, to correct me if I misstate it." She paused. Knott on the bench inclined his head fractionally. He would not lie about a date. 3 centuries, and the House of Black is not 3 centuries old. It is older than the Wisengamot in this chamber. It is older than the statute of secrecy. It is, by its own founding instruments, older than the office of the minister presiding over us today. And I would ask the chamber a simple question of law. Her voice sharpened. When a family passes a rule in 1712, can that rule bind the family's own founding magic, which is 1,000 years its senior? Can a grandson amend his great-grandfather's oath? Can the servant rewrite the terms of the master's will and then cite his own forgery as settled law? The murmur changed its shape. "The petitioner calls the heart of Black a family artifact," Hermione went on, and now she was moving, walking the floor, and the chamber's eyes moved with her. "It is not an artifact. It is the founding condition of the entire house. Every galleon in those vaults, every stone of that seat, every privilege of that Wisengamot chair exists because 1,000 years ago the first Blacks swore an oath to a power older than their name, and that power in exchange made them what they were. The vaults are not the inheritance, the vaults are the interest, the heart is the principle, and counsel proposes that this chamber award the interest to his client while ignoring the principal's own recorded and witnessed refusal to be held by him. That is not inheritance law. That is a man trying to sell you a house while the owner is standing in the doorway saying he does not live here. The owner," said Travers, rising smoothly, "is a family relic that glows. My learned friend asks this chamber to be governed by the moods of a lamp." "Your learned friend," said Hermione, asks this chamber to be governed by the founding law of the very house whose property you are trying to distribute. You cannot claim the inheritance of the House of Black and in the same breath ask the court to ignore the House of Black's oldest and highest instrument because it is inconvenient. Choose one. Either the ancient law of this house governs, in which case the right of recognition, performed and witnessed 3 nights ago, is dispositive and my clients have already won. Or the ancient law does not govern, in which case your client has no claim to any of it, because every scrap of it, the gold, the seat, the name, descends from that same ancient law you are asking the court to disregard. She turned to Kingsley. The petitioner wants the parts of the old magic that make men rich and none of the parts that tell them no. I am asking this chamber to take the old law whole or leave it whole. It does not come in pieces. It was Corvin Knott who rose to meet her, and Hermione had known he would and had wanted him to, because Knott would fight on the one ground where she was strongest, which was the ground of fact. Pretty argument, Knott said in his dry curator's voice, and I will not insult it. But arguments are wind, young woman, and I deal in ledgers. You claim descent from a daughter of this house named Iola, burned from the tree in the year 1875 for marriage to a muggle. I do not dispute that Iola Black existed. I dispute that you can prove 3 generations of unbroken descent from a woman who left no magical record, married into a family that kept no magical record, and vanished into a city of 9 million muggles. Where are your instruments? Where is your proof? A tapestry that glows is not a birth register. You ask this chamber to seat a keeper of the oldest house in Britain on the strength of a family legend about a girl called Grandma Jean. It was not Hermione who answered him. It was Neville. He rose from the benches behind, awkward and apologetic and utterly certain, with a folder of his grandmother's papers under his arm, and he said, "Counselor Knott, sir, I'm sorry, but that's not quite right, and I can show you why, and I've checked it 3 times because Gran made me." He opened the folder. The House of Black kept a record you're forgetting, not the tapestry. The Doomsday Ledger, the disowning book, where they wrote down every name they burned and why, so the family would never accidentally readmit a tainted line. It's a nasty little book, and it's still in the Black Library, and it's the best genealogical record in Britain, precisely because the family was so proud of who it threw out. It records Iola Black's disowning, and it records the name of the man she married, Robert Hitchens, and his parish and his trade, and it records, because the family kept watch on the ones it burned for 2 generations to be sure they'd truly gone to the muggles, the birth of Iola's daughter and her daughter's daughter. He set a page on the rail. After that the Black family stopped watching because they decided the line was safely lost. But the muggles, sir, keep the most obsessive records in the world. Births, marriages, deaths, everyone, in a registry office anyone can visit, and Hermione and I spent 2 days in one, and the line runs unbroken from Iola's granddaughter, where the Black Ledger stops, straight down through the Hitchens family of London to a woman named Jean Hitchens, who married a man named Granger, whose son married and whose granddaughter is sitting in front of you. He pushed the whole folder across. It's all there. Black records at the top, Muggle records at the bottom, and they meet in the middle without a single gap. You wanted instruments, sir. The Muggles had better ones than we did. They just didn't know what they were keeping. Knott took the folder. He was a purist and a genealogist, and by his own cold lights an honest man, and he read it slowly in the silence of the chamber, and Hermione watched the fight go out of him page by page, because a man who has worshipped bloodlines his whole life cannot, when shown a bloodline proven beyond dispute, pretend it is not there. He closed the folder. He did not hand it back. He looked at Hermione for a long moment with an expression she could not name and did not expect, something almost like grief. "It is unbroken," Knott said quietly to the chamber. "I have spent 40 years correcting other men's genealogies, and I can find no fault in this one. The descent is proven. Whatever else is argued here today, let no member of this chamber say again that the young woman is not of the blood. She is a daughter of the House of Black by the oldest and purest descent in the room, and I will not be party to the lie that she is not." He sat heavily and did not look at Lucius, and Hermione understood that she had just won something from Corvin Knott that was worth more than his vote, which was his refusal to lie, and that Lucius had lost it in the same moment, and that Lucius knew. It was Ogden who nailed it down. He rose from the elder's bench when Kingsley called him, and the chamber quieted for him as it had not quieted for anyone, because Tiberius Ogden had told the Wisengamot uncomfortable truths for 60 years and had never once been caught in a convenient one. "I have kept the register of the ancient houses since before most of you sat in those seats," he said. "I have no interest in the Potter claim, no love for the black gold, and no patience left, at my age, for being made a party to anyone's ambition. I went down under Grimmauld Place 3 nights ago fully expecting to expose a fraud, because in 60 years every wonder anyone ever showed me turned out to be a swindle, and I am too old and too tired to be swindled." He let the silence hold. "I was not swindled. I stood in a hall older than this ministry, and I watched the founding magic of the House of Black examine 2 people, in blood and in will, and acknowledge them, in a voice I felt in my bones as its true and chosen heirs. I will not describe it further because you would not believe the description and I would not blame you. I will say only this. In 60 years of keeping that register, I have learned to tell the difference between a thing a family wants to be true and a thing that is true whether the family wants it or not. What I witnessed was the second kind. I have deposed to it under oath. I will defend that deposition with my name, and my name, colleagues, has never yet been attached to a lie, and I do not intend to begin now, 3 months short of 91, for the convenience of Lucius Malfoy. He sat. The chamber did not murmur. It was silent, and the silence was worth more than any speech, and Hermione, beside Harry, let out a slow breath and did not look at anyone, because she knew better than to look pleased in a room she had not yet won. Then Andromeda rose, unbidden, and asked leave to speak, and Kingsley granted it, and she stood in the center of the pit in her plain gray robes with her back very straight and looked up at the benches full of the families that had toasted her death. "Most of you knew my name before I was disowned," she said. "Some of you were at the party they held to celebrate it. I was cut off this family's tree 30 years ago for the crime of marrying a Muggle-born man I loved, and I have spent every day since being glad of it because I got a marriage and a daughter and a grandson out of the bargain, and the family got to keep its purity, and I would not trade with a single one of you." She looked along the benches. "I am not here to plead. I am here to tell you a fact you can verify, because the heart of Black reached for me too, 3 nights ago for a moment before it found the ones it wanted. It reached for the disowned daughter. It has never once in 300 years reached for a pureblood son that the family put forward because the family stopped letting it choose. That is the secret the Compact of 1712 was written to hide. The heart never wanted what you kept giving it. It wanted the ones you threw away." Her chin lifted, and it was, Harry saw, the same lift as Iola's in the deep gallery, the same as Hermione's across the table, the stubborn black chin surviving in the lines they had tried hardest to kill. "You can vote today for the law that lets you keep pretending, or you can vote for the truth the heart has already told. But do not tell yourselves you are defending the House of Black by handing it to Lucius Malfoy. You are defending the lie the House of Black told about itself. There is a difference, and at my age I have stopped being polite about it." She sat, and the room, which had tilted so surely toward Lucius an hour before, was tilting now the other way, and Lucius Malfoy, who read rooms the way other men read weather, felt it tilt and rose. He did not argue the law. That was the thing Harry would remember later about how dangerous Lucius Malfoy was. He knew when he had lost an argument, and he did not waste breath defending a position the room had abandoned. He simply changed the ground under everyone's feet. "My learned opponent has made an elegant case," Lucius said, "and I find to my surprise that I agree with the heart of it." He let that sit and watched the confusion move across the benches and permitted himself the faint courtesy of a man about to win. "She says the ancient law of the house must be taken whole or left whole. She says it does not come in pieces. She is entirely correct, and so I withdraw the petition of recognized dissent." A stir sharp all along the benches. "I withdraw it. Let no one say the House of Malfoy hid behind a rule of 1712. If this is to be settled by the ancient law of the House of Black, then let it be settled by the ancient law of the House of Black, in full. And the ancient law of the House of Black, colleagues, does not name its keeper by a right witnessed privately in a cellar by one old man in a room full of the claimant's own friends and relations." Hermione was on her feet. "The right was witnessed by the keeper of the register, whose neutrality this chamber has never once. The ancient law of the House of Black," Lucius continued over her, smooth and cold and certain, "names its keeper by crowning. Not by recognition, by crowning. In the obsidian hall upon the seat of stars before all claimants of the blood, where any child of the line may present themselves, and let the heart itself choose among them in the open, so that no man may ever say the choice was arranged." He turned slowly and looked at Harry directly for the first time, and his pale eyes were without heat. "Mr. Potter has been recognized. Very well. Recognition is a betrothal. It is not a wedding. The House of Black has never been ruled by the recognized. It has been ruled by the crowned. And my son, who carries the pure and unbroken blood of Narcissa, born black, has as much right as any man living to descend into that hall and present himself for crowning, and let the heart choose between him and Mr. Potter in the sight of witnesses that no one can impugn." He spread his hands, the picture of reason. "If the heart is as certain of Mr. Potter as the old man says, then my son will fail, and fail publicly, and the matter will be closed forever with no shadow upon it. Surely my learned opponent, who is so confident, cannot object to that, unless, of course, she is less confident than she pretends." It was beautifully done. Harry could see it done and could see no way through it, because it was, on its face, exactly fair, and Hermione's own argument had built the road for it. Take the old law whole, the old law crowned, let both claim and let the heart decide. To refuse it was to look afraid. To accept it was to open the door of the obsidian hall, on a set and public day, to Draco Malfoy and whatever came into that hall behind him. And behind Lucius, on the traditionalist bench, Lady Belvina Burke sat with her pale eyes fixed on Harry and Hermione, and she was smiling very slightly, and her smile had nothing in it of a woman anticipating her side's legal victory. Her smile was the smile of a woman watching a door swing open that she had waited a very long time to walk through, and Hermione saw it, and understood in a cold rush that Lucius was not the most dangerous person in the chamber, and that Lucius, clever as he was, did not know it either. "We do not object," Hermione heard herself say, because there was nothing else to say that would not lose them the 40. "The heirs of the House of Black do not fear the House of Black's own judgment. Let there be a crowning. Let the heart choose in the open. We consent." "Then we are agreed," said Lucius, and inclined his head and sat. Kingsley did not rule at once. He was too careful for that, and he called a recess, and consulted the elders, and had the founding instruments brought and read, and Ogden with them, and it was 2 hours before he returned to the high seat and gave the judgment of the chamber, and the judgment was very nearly what Lucius had asked for, because the law gave him no room to make it otherwise. The matter of the House of Black, Kingsley ruled, being a matter of the ancient law of that house and not of the general law of the realm, would be settled by the ancient law of that house, in the manner that law provided, which was the crowning. On a date to be fixed by the keeper of the register, all claimants of black blood who wished to present themselves would descend into the ancestral seat and submit to the rite of crowning, before witnesses appointed by the chamber, and the heart of black would choose its keeper in the sight of those witnesses, and the choice of the heart so witnessed would be final and beyond appeal, and this chamber would enforce it as the law of the land. "Let the keeper fix the date," Kingsley finished, "and let it be soon, for the peace of the realm, and let every claimant be warned that the rite of crowning is not the rite of recognition, and is said in the old books to be perilous, and that this chamber crowns no one and buries no one and takes no responsibility for what 1,000-year-old magic does to those who present themselves to it. You go down at your own risk, descend accordingly." Ogden fixed the date before he left the chamber, and he fixed it, after a private and unhappy word with Sirius, at the dark of the moon 3 weeks hence, because the old book said the heart burned truest when the sky above the vault was starless, and because 3 weeks was as long as he dared leave awakened heart in a stirring deep unattended, and as short as he dared give 2 young people to prepare for a thing that had killed better prepared claimants than they. 3 weeks. A crowning. Door legally and publicly opened, through which Draco Malfoy would descend into the Obsidian Hall carrying the pure blood the deep had been starving for, with his father's ambition behind him and Belvina Burke's patient smile behind that, and behind all of it, 400 years down in the dark, a drowned crown turning over in its sleep, waking now in earnest, because the door it had waited 4 centuries for had just been thrown open by the Wisengamot of Great Britain in the name of the settled law. Narcissa Malfoy was waiting for them in the corridor outside the chamber. She had sent Lucius and Draco ahead, and she stood alone by a tall dark window with the London evening behind her, and she did not look like a woman whose side had just won a great procedural victory. She looked like a mother, and when Harry and Hermione came out into the corridor she stepped into their path, not threatening, only urgent, and she spoke low and fast before either of them could raise a wand or a word. "I have perhaps a minute before my husband wonders where I am, so I will not waste it on pleasantries, of which I have none for either of you in any case." Her pale eyes went from Harry to Hermione and settled on Hermione. "You saw her in the chamber, Belvina Burke, you saw her face." "We saw it," Hermione said carefully. "Then you are not fools, and I will speak plainly." Narcissa's hands were folded and they were not still. "My husband believes he is using the Council of Cousins to seat my son on the throne of the House of Black. He believes Belvina Burke is his ally, a useful old purist who wants what he wants. He is wrong, and he cannot be told, because a man who has been certain for 40 years does not learn a new thing at 50. I am telling you instead, because you are the only people in this affair with any reason to keep my son alive." Her chin came up, and it was, Harry saw, a black chin too, the same as Andromeda's, the same as the woman in the deep gallery. "I was born a black, I feel the heart, I felt it wake, and I felt what woke under it, and I have felt Belvina Burke change over these last months into something that is not entirely Belvina Burke any longer. She came to my husband a week before the heart woke. She brought him a certain letter. She has been guiding him toward this crowning with a patience no ordinary ambition explains, and she wants my Draco in that hall on that dais with a crown she will provide, and she does not want it for the Malfoys, and she does not want it for the purists. She wants it for something else, something old and drowned and hungry that has been waiting 400 years for a boy of pure blood proud enough to put its crown on." "Then keep Draco out of the hall," Hermione said. "Withdraw his claim." "You're his mother, he'll listen to." "He will not," Narcissa said, and for the length of a breath her composure thinned to nothing and the fear showed through naked before she folded it away again. "He is 19 and his father has told him his whole life that he was born to hold this, and Belvina Burke has told him he is worthy where you are not, and there is nothing a proud, frightened boy wants more than to be told he is worthy by someone who seems to know. He will go down into that hall whatever I say. So I am not asking you to save him from the crowning. I am asking you to be ready in that hall when he reaches for the wrong crown, to be the ones who do not let the drowned thing have him." She stepped back. "I have never in my life asked a mudblood and a half-blood for anything, and I find I would rather ask you than lose my son, which tells you how frightened I am, so do not mistake it for warmth." win your crowning, beat my husband in the open fairly and humiliate him, I do not care. Only when the moment comes, and it will come, do not let Belvina Burke put that crown on my son's head. That is all, that is everything." She was gone before they could answer, her heels quick on the stone, and Harry and Hermione stood alone in the corridor with the weight of it settling over them, one more thread in a knot that was pulling tighter by the hour. "She's telling the truth," Hermione said at last low. "That's the worst part. She's frightened enough to beg her enemies. Burke isn't Lucius's ally." "Burke is the crown's. Then we've got two fights in that hall," Harry said. "The one Lucius thinks he's having and the real one." He looked at the dark window and the city beyond it. "Come on, the others are waiting." They gathered on the steps of the ministry afterward, the whole found family crowd of them in the ordinary London evening, and it should have felt like defeat and did not quite. Sirius was grim, Ogden was grimmer. But Molly had her arms around Hermione, and Ron was already 3 moves into a plan involving wards and shifts and who sleeps where, and Neville was quietly telling Andromeda that his grandmother sent her regards and her respect, which from Augusta Longbottom was a coronation of its own, and Luna was looking up at the darkening sky with her head tipped, as though she could already see the dark of the moon coming. Harry stood a little apart at the top of the steps, and Hermione came and stood beside him, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the city went about its evening below them. "You were magnificent in there," Harry said. "I hope you know that. You took his whole case apart with your bare hands." "And he handed me a worse one back," Hermione said. "I built the road he drove down, take the old law hole. I said it, I gave it to him." She pressed her fingertips against her eyes. "I won the argument and lost the ground, Harry. In 3 weeks we go down into that hall with Draco Malfoy and whatever Belvina Burke is really serving, and the right that recognized us in safety is going to be set again in earnest, and Ogden thinks it can kill us, and I walked us into it because I was too proud to look afraid." "No," Harry said. He turned her toward him, both hands on her shoulders, and he waited until she looked at him. "You didn't walk us into anything. Always going to be the hall. The heart said it that first night, come and be crowned. It was never going to let us stop at recognized. We were always going down there again." His hands were steady on her shoulders. "So we go down, together, the way it wants, the way we said. And we take everyone up here down with us, all of them, because that's the part Lucius doesn't understand and never will. He thinks a crowning is a man alone on a throne. He's bringing Draco and a dead king's hunger. We're bringing a family," he almost smiled. "I like our odds better than he thinks." Hermione looked at him for a long moment in the gray London light, and whatever had been coiled tight in her all through the chamber loosened, not gone, but held now by something steadier than pride, and she reached up and took hold of the front of his robes with both hands, not pulling him anywhere, just holding on, the two of them at the top of the ministry steps with 3 weeks and 1 dark moon and a hall of stars between them and the end of it. "All right," she said, "together. And we're going to need every book in that library and every friend on these steps, and probably a great deal more than that." She let go of his robes and straightened his collar where she had crumpled it, an ordinary fussing gesture that steadied them both. "Come on. Molly's made enough food to provision a war, and it appears we're having one, and I refuse to fight it hungry." Below them, the found family was already moving down the steps into the evening, toward the terrible old house and the vacant heart beneath it and the 3 weeks that were all the time they had, and Harry and Hermione went down the ministry steps together into the middle of them, and behind and beneath the whole sleeping city, in the deep under the obsidian hall, the drowned crown turned once more in the dark and began at last to rise. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The house remembers there was a keep above the hall. Hermione had assumed, until Creature told her otherwise, that the obsidian hall lay simply beneath Grimmauld Place, a cellar of the London townhouse enlarged by old magic. She was wrong. The hall was the root of a far greater thing, and the black door in the cellar was only the nearest of its doors, and there were older ones. The true ancestral seat of the House of Black did not stand in London at all. It stood on a headland in the far north of Scotland, above a cold grey sea, and it had stood there since before the Romans, and its name was Ravensmoor, and no living Black had set foot in it for 140 years, because the keep, like the hall beneath it, had refused them. It did not refuse Harry and Hermione. They came to it on the 4th morning after the hearing, by a portky creature had guarded through the long decades of the family's exile, and they arrived on the headland in a wind off the sea that tasted of salt and cold iron, and the keep rose in front of them out of the heather, black stone against a white sky. Its towers wound about with the same silver-veined obsidian as the hall far below, and as they stood there the great gates of it, shut for a century and more, drew back without a hand to move them. And warmth came out of the dark doorway to meet them, hearth warmth, the smell of wood smoke and old stone, and faintly of bread, as though somewhere inside a kitchen had been kept ready all these years for exactly this homecoming. "It knows you're coming," Sirius said. He stood on the headland looking up at the keep of his fathers with an expression Harry had never seen on him, a man looking at the childhood he had been denied. "It never opened for me. I came here once when I was 17 and running, and I stood on this exact spot and the gate stayed shut, and I slept in the heather and left in the morning and told myself I didn't care." He drew a breath of the sea wind. Look at it open for you, just look at it. They went in, all of them, the whole company that would hold the keep through the 3 weeks to the crowning. Harry and Hermione, Sirius, Andromeda with little Teddy, creature Ogden, who had appointed himself their tutor in the old law and would not be dissuaded, and in shifts the found family from the south, Ron and Bill for the wards, Molly for the kitchens, Neville and Luna and Ginny for the 100 tasks of besieged castle needs. And the keep took them all in, and the hearths lit as they passed, room after room waking to firelight after a century of dark, and the portraits along the walls opened their painted eyes and watched the young keepers go by, and did not sneer, because these were not the portraits of the pureblood centuries. These were older. These were the keepers from before the lie. That first night in the keep, Molly Weasley found the great kitchen, and the great kitchen, which had fed the household of a dynasty and then stood cold for 140 years, seemed to sigh with relief and give itself over to her, and by evening the smell of a proper supper was climbing every stair in Ravensmoor. They ate in the small hall off the kitchen rather than the cold state-rooms, all of them crowded around one long scarred table with the fire roaring, and for a few hours the keep was not a fortress waiting for a dark moon but simply a house full of a family too large for it, which is what it had been built before everything to be. Sirius sat at the head of the table because Harry made him over his protests, and he told stories, not the grim ones. He told them about the keep as he had imagined it, as a boy locked in the London house, dreaming of the northern seat he had never been allowed to see. He had built a whole Ravensmoor in his head at 9 years old, he said, a keep where the Blacks were the sort of family the name deserved instead of the sort it got, where there were dogs in the hall and children on the stairs, and no one was ever burned off any wall for loving the wrong person. And he had been so ashamed of the daydream that he had never told a living soul, and here he was at 41 eating Molly Weasley's stew in the real thing, and the real thing was better than the daydream. Because the daydream had never had these particular people in it. To the keepers who came before the lie, he said, lifting his glass, and his voice was not entirely steady, and to the two who are ending it. I spent my whole life running from this name. Turns out I was only running from what they'd made of it. Turns out the name was worth something after all underneath. I just had to wait for the right pair to dig it out. He looked down the table at Harry and Hermione, side by side in the firelight. I'd have taken you both into this family if there were no keep and no heart and no crown in the whole world. You know that. This is only the part where the rest of the world finds out what I've known since you were 11. Molly wept comfortably into her napkin and told everyone to eat more. Ron proposed a rival toast to the cook, which the cook accepted with dignity. Teddy, who was 2 and did not understand a word of it, banged his spoon and demanded to be lifted onto Harry's knee, and Harry lifted him, and the child fell asleep there before the pudding. One small fist knotted in Harry's collar, and Harry held him and did not eat his pudding rather than move him. And Hermione, beside them, put her head briefly against Harry's shoulder and left it there, and no one at the table remarked on it because it was, to all of them, the least surprising thing in the world. It was a good night. They would need the memory of it in the nights to come, and something in each of them new to store it up. The library at Ravensmoor was the true one, of which the library at Grimmauld Place was only a shadow and a copy, and it was here that the house began in earnest to teach them what they were. It taught them through a portrait. She hung above the great hearth in the library, a woman in robes of a fashion so old that Hermione could not date it, dark-haired, sharp-eyed, neither young nor old, and beneath her a plate of tarnished silver read only ELARA, the first keeper, and for 2 days after their arrival she had watched them work without speaking, as portraits will, taking their measure. On the third night, when the others had gone to their beds and only Harry and Hermione remained in the firelight among the towering shelves, the first keeper spoke. "You have been reading the forgeries," she said. Her painted voice was dry and amused and very tired. "The founding rites as the pureblood boys rewrote them, full of blood and lineage and the word pure hammered in wherever a gap could be found. You have been reading them and frowning, girl, because they do not hang together, and they do not hang together because they are lies, and I am weary unto death of being quoted in lies. Would you like to hear the truth from the woman who made the oath? I have waited 900 years for someone to ask." "Yes," Hermione said, and set down her quill. "Please, yes. There was no house of black at the beginning," said Alara, the first keeper. "There was only the heart, and it was here before us, in the deep under this headland, a well of the old magic that pooled here as water pools in a low place, older than names, older than wands, and it was wild, and it was strong, and it was alone." Her painted eyes went to the fire. "Wild power draws hungry hands. There were those who found it and tried to drink it dry, and those who found it and tried to cage it and sell its light, and the heart, being wild, could not defend itself, only lash out, and the lashing killed the innocent along with the greedy. I was a hedge witch of no family and no blood worth naming, and I came to the heart not to take it, but because it was in pain, and I sat with it, and I did not reach for it, and after a long time it reached for me." She looked back at them. "That is the whole of the founding, not blood, not lineage, a woman who did not grab. The heart and I made an oath, the two of us, the first oath. I would guard it and never own it, and it would lend me its strength to guard it with, and neither of us would ever be the master of the other. Guardianship, a marriage of equals between a woman and a wild old power. That is what the House of Black is. Everything else they built on top of it is a house of thieves squatting in a temple. Harry had come to stand beside Hermione at the hearth, and he asked the question that mattered. Why two? The heart chose the two of us together. It keeps saying it won't hold one of us without the other. If you founded it alone, why does it want a pair now? Alara's painted face grew grave. Because of what came after me and what I learned too late. I held the heart alone for 60 years, and I held it well, but I was one woman, and one hand can be forced. When I grew old, the greedy came again, and they could not take the heart from me, but they could take me, and they threatened those I loved, and for one night, one single night, an old woman alone and afraid nearly gave them what they wanted to save a child's life. I did not. The heart forgave me, but I understood that night the flaw in a keeper who stands alone. A single hand can be seized, a single heart can be broken and made to bargain. So when I chose my successors, I chose two, always after that, two who loved each other and had chosen each other freely, because two hands cannot be forced the same way, because you cannot break one of a true pair without the other holding fast, because a power held between two who love is held in a knot that fear cannot untie. She looked at them, the young man and the young woman standing close together at her hearth, and something eased in her ancient painted face. That is the sovereignty that is not held in one hand, not a king and his consort, two keepers equal who chose each other, standing between the world and a wild old power so that no single fear and no single greed can ever reach it through them. That is what the heart lost when the blood-proud made it about sons and arrangements. That is what it has been reaching for in the dark all these long years, not an heir, a pair. And it has found one, and I have lived in a painting for 900 years to see it, and I am glad. The one in the deep, Hermione said quietly. Cassius, Ogden told us the outline of it, but you were here. You watched it happen, didn't you? You watched one of your own keepers go wrong. The first keeper was silent for a while, and when she spoke again, her painted voice had lost its dryness and gone to something older and sadder. He was not always a thief, Alara said. That is the part the histories leave out because it is the frightening part. Cassius Black was a keeper of the true line, chosen the old way, and for a time he was a good one. I hung on this wall and watched him tend the heart with real devotion. But his pair died. That is where it began. He was crowned one of two, as all true keepers are, and the one he loved, the one he chose, died young of an ordinary fever that no magic could touch, and Cassius was left holding a sovereignty meant for two hands and one hand alone, and it broke something in him that grief breaks in the strong more often than in the weak. She looked at them, the young pair standing close together at her hearth. He decided in his grief that the flaw was in the arrangement. That a power which could be halved by a single death, which depended on something as fragile as one mortal heart continuing to beat, was a power built wrong. He decided love was the weakness, not the strength, and so he set out to remove it, to bind the heart to blood alone, to lineage, to a thing that could be inherited and could not die of a fever, so that no keeper would ever again be left as he had been left. Her painted hands folded. Do you see? He did not begin as a monster. He began as a widower who could not bear that he had loved and had lost, and that the losing had cost the world its guardian. He built the crown to make love unnecessary, and the heart cast him down, not because his grief was wrong, but because the cure was worse than the wound, because a guardianship with the love stripped out of it is only a weapon that has forgotten why it was made. That is the thing that waits in the deep, not hatred. Grief, gone 400 years without comfort, curdled into the conviction that it was right all along. She fixed them with her ancient eyes. He will tell you love is a weakness. He will say it out of real pain, which is what makes it dangerous, because a lie told out of genuine grief has the ring of hard-won truth. Do not believe him. I held this heart alone, and I held it with two, and I am telling you from 900 years of watching, the two-hand hold is not the weaker one. It is the only one that has ever lasted. Cassius proved it, though he would die again before admitting it. A man alone in his grief nearly destroyed everything the House of Black was ever for. It took a pair to break him then. It will take a pair to break him now. They learned the rest over the days that followed, and the rest was harder. Ogden taught them the shape of the crowning rite, and it was the recognition made whole and made perilous. Where recognition asked only that the heart acknowledge them, the crowning asked that they receive its full weight, the whole of the old magic, into the bond between them, and hold it, awake in the open, before witnesses, against any claim contested in that same hour. It was not a ceremony. It was a threshold that could be crossed only once and could not be uncrossed, and Ogden did not soften it. If you falter in the hall, you do not get a second attempt, the old man said, over the founding books spread across the library table. The heart will not offer twice in one night, and you will not falter alone, because Malfoy's boy will be in that hall claiming against you, and the old books are plain about what a contested crowning is. Two claims, one heart, and the heart choosing between them in the sight of all, and the rejected claim does not simply lose. The rejected claim is unmade. Whatever the claimant reached for, the heart takes back, root and branch, and a claimant who reached with the wrong crown in his hands, who reached to take rather than to receive, is not merely refused. He closed the book. He is consumed. That is the peril the Wisengamot washed its hands of. That is why I fixed the date at the dark of the moon and not a day later, and why I have not slept properly since. If young Malfoy goes down into that hall wearing Cassius Black's crown, believing he can take what only ever gets given, then whatever is left of Cassius comes up through him to finish what it began 4 centuries ago, and the crowning becomes not a coronation but a resurrection, and you two will be standing on the same dais when it happens. Then we don't let him wear it, Harry said. You may not be able to stop him, Ogden said. His mother cannot, his father will not. And Belvina Burke wants nothing else in the world. He looked at them across the old books with his pale, unbribable eyes. So you had better be certain, the two of you, not of the law, of each other. Because the one thing Cassius Black never had, the one thing that broke his crown the first time and can break it again, is the thing the first keeper made this whole house to hold, two who chose each other freely and cannot be forced apart. If there is any crack between you, any doubt, any part of either of you that would let go of the other to save yourself, the heart will feel it, and so will the thing in the deep, and it will drive a wedge into that crack and pry you apart, and then you will both be alone in that hall, and alone is how Cassius wins. He rose stiff and gathered his hat. I am an old man and I have no gift for this next part, so I will say it once and plainly and then leave you to it. Whatever is between you two that you have not yet said to each other, say it, before the dark of the moon. Say it and mean it, because in that hall it will be load-bearing, and I will not have you discover the strength of it for the first time with a dead king's crown in the room. He left them in the firelight, and neither of them said anything for a while. 400 miles to the south, in a cold gallery of Malfoy Manor, another crowning was being prepared, and its candidate was not sleeping well. Draco Malfoy stood before a mirror at 2 in the morning because he could not lie still, and behind him, seated in the dark with her hands folded, Belvina Burke watched him with her pale, patient eyes. She had taken to coming at night when Lucius thought his son was resting and Narcissa thought he was with his father. She never raised her voice, she never pressed, she only talked in her low, even way, and the talking got in night after night, the water finding the crack in the stone. "You are afraid," Belvina said. It was not an accusation. That is only sense. A lesser boy would not be afraid because a lesser boy would not understand what is being asked of him. You understand, that is why I chose you, Draco, and not some braver fool. The brave ones are no use. They rush in and the heart burns them for their arrogance. What the crowning wants is someone who knows exactly how much there is to lose and reaches for it anyway. That is not cowardice, whatever your father's shouting has taught you to think. That is the only courage that has ever built anything. Potter's been recognized, Draco said to the mirror. The old man witnessed it. The heart chose him. Everyone knows. My father won't say it, but everyone knows. The heart chose a half-blood and a mudblood because it has grown sentimental in its long neglect, and a sentimental power can be corrected. Belvina rose and came to stand behind him, and in the mirror her face beside his was calm and cold and certain, and the certainty was the thing he could not stop drinking because he had been starving for it his whole life. You have been told always that you were born to hold this, by your father who wanted it for the family. I am telling you something your father never could because he does not have it to give. I am telling you that you are worthy, not the family, you. That when you descend into that hall and take up the crown I have kept for you, the old magic will look at you and see, not a Malfoy, not a purist's puppet, but the one person in 400 years with the clarity to take what the sentimental thing refuses to give freely. Her voice dropped, gentle, terrible. Potter reaches out both hands and waits to be given a gift, like a child at a birthday. You will not wait, you will take, and taking is not the lesser thing, Draco. Taking is what kings do. The ones who wait to be given things are the ones who spend their lives nailing. Draco looked at the crown she had shown him once in a box lined with black silk, a thing of dull dark metal that seemed to drink the candlelight, and he had felt it call to him, felt it promise him the one thing no one in his whole cold childhood had ever quite given him. And he did not know, because she had been careful never to say it, that the voice he heard when he looked at the crown was not Belvina Burke's at all, but a thin and patient voice 400 years old, speaking through her out of the dark under the world, and that it had said these exact words to a grieving man once before, and that the man had put the crown on and had not come up again. "They'll all be there," Draco said, watching. "If I fail, you will not fail," said the thing wearing Belvina Burke like a glove, "because you, unlike Potter, understand that there is no one coming to hold your hand. You will go down alone, and you will take what is yours alone, and you will owe it to no one." Is that not better, is that not cleaner than his crowd of blood traitors and elves? One man, one crown, one throne, and no fragile beating heart anywhere in it that grief could ever take away. The pale eyes held his in the mirror. "Rest now. The dark of the moon is close, and you are so very nearly ready." The days filled with work, because work was easier than the thing Ogden had left in the room. Bill and Ron laid wards, and the keep helped them, the old stones showing Bill defenses that no cursebreaker had seen in a century, and by the end of the first week Ravensmoor was sealed tighter than Gringotts. Hermione mastered the words of the rite until she could say them backward and did once to be sure, and the founding books stopped fighting her and began, page by page, to open themselves to her hands. Harry learned the old defensive magic of the keepers from Alara's portrait and from the stone itself, magic that had nothing to do with dueling, magic of holding and warding and standing fast, the magic of a body between a danger and the thing it guarded, and he took to it as he had taken to every hard, useful thing in his life without fuss, until the keep itself seemed to lean toward him when he worked, recognizing a guardian in its bones. They practiced the joined offering together in the empty state hall, over and over, until it stopped being a sequence of words and became a thing their two bodies knew. Ogden drilled them without mercy. He would call a stop in the middle of it and demand to know whose hand had faltered, and it was always the same lesson underneath the drilling. The rite did not care how well they said it separately. It cared only whether the join held. Hermione could recite the whole founding oath flawlessly, and Harry could hold a ward against Bill's hardest curse for a quarter of an hour, and none of that mattered, Ogden said, if in the instant the heart came down between them one of them flinched from the other. So they learned the join. They learned to feel the other's hand before it moved, to speak the last words on a single breath shared between them, to stand so close in the dark of the practice that they stopped being two people performing a rite in parallel and became one act performed by two. And on the 9th night, without Ogden calling it, they finished the joined offering together in perfect time, every word landing as one word, and the empty state hall rang faintly in answer, the old stone recognizing something true, and Ogden, watching from the shadows, took off his hat and said nothing at all, which from Ogden was the highest praise there was. And in the evenings, when the found family had scattered to their tasks and the great keep quieted, Harry and Hermione walked the walls together above the cold sea, and did not say the thing, and both of them knew they were not saying it, and the not saying grew heavier every night. It was Andromeda who pushed them in the end without seeming to. She found Harry alone on the seaward wall one evening at dusk, watching the gray water go dark, and she came and stood beside him with Teddy asleep in a sling against her chest, and for a while she said nothing. Then, quietly looking out at the sea and nodded at him, "My Ted asked me to marry him on a wall not unlike this one. Frightened out of his wits, poor man. He was a muggle-born nobody, and I was a disowned daughter of the oldest house in Britain, and we had nothing, and the whole world had told us it would never work, and he stood there terrified and asked me anyway, because he'd worked out that the frightening thing and the right thing were the same thing, and he'd rather be frightened with me than safe without me." She adjusted the sleeping child against her. "I nearly said no, not because I didn't love him. Because I was afraid, and afraid feels so much like wisdom when you're young. I nearly let the fear make the choice, and if I had, I would not have had my Dora, and I would not have this one." Her hand rested on Teddy's back. "The keep is going to ask you to be two who chose each other freely, in front of a dead king and half the Wisengamot. That is a great deal to ask of two people who have never once in 7 years managed to say it to each other in an empty room." She turned from the sea at last and looked at Harry. "Don't let it be the hall that makes you brave, Harry. Be brave now while it's just the two of you in the sea. It's a much better place to be frightened." She left him there, and Harry stood on the wall until the last light was gone, and then he went to find Hermione. She was in the library, of course, at the great table, with the founding books open and a candle burned down beside her, and she was not reading. She was sitting with her hands flat on either side of the open book, looking at nothing, and when he came in she did not pretend otherwise. "I can't concentrate," she said. "I've read the same paragraph 11 times. Ogden's voice keeps getting in the way." She looked up at him, and the candlelight was warm on her face, and there was in her expression something unguarded that she did not usually let anyone see, not even him, or perhaps only ever him. "Say it and mean it," he said, load-bearing. As if it were a beam in a roof, she laughed once unsteadily. "I have argued the House of Black's case before the entire Wisengamot. I descended into a hall of stars and gave my blood to wild old power, and I did not falter, and I cannot say 6 words to you across a library table." Harry came around the table and crouched down beside her chair so that he was looking up at her, and he took her hand off the book and held it in both of his, and he did not let go. "Then let me," he said, "because I've been trying to work out when it started so I could tell you properly, with a date and everything, you'd want a date." His thumb moved once across her knuckles. "And I can't find one, that's the thing. I've been looking for the moment I fell in love with you, and there isn't one, because there was never a time I wasn't. It's not a thing that happened to me, Hermione. It's just the shape I've always been. You were the first person who ever came for me, and you never once stopped coming. And every single time the ground opened up in my life, you were already standing at the edge with your hand out, and I built my whole self around the fact of you without ever once saying thank you, or noticing I'd done it, or telling you that as far back as I can remember there has been you, and there has been everything else, and the everything else has never come close." He held her hand against his chest. "So it's not 6 words, it's more than 6, but the middle of it is, I love you, not for the right, not for the crown. I'd love you if there were no hall and no heart and no House of Black at all, if we were nobody, if we were 2 muggles who never got the letter. I have chosen you every day of my life without being asked. I'm only just now saying it out loud." Hermione looked at him for a long moment, and the fierce composure that had carried her through the chamber and the hall and every hard year before them did not so much break as open, like a door that had been locked from the inside and was, at last, being unlocked by the one hand that had always held the key. "I made a list once," she said, and her voice was not quite steady, and she did not try to make it so. "I was 15 and I was furious about it, so I made a list of all the reasons it was impractical to be in love with you, because I thought if I could see it written down I could be sensible about it. It was a very good list, well reasoned. I still have it somewhere." She turned her hand in his so that their fingers laced together. "I have ignored my own excellent advice about you every single day for 7 years, Harry Potter. I have walked into fire for you and lied for you and rebuilt your whole life around you when it fell down, and I told myself it was friendship and loyalty and being sensible, and it was never any of those things, or it was all of them and something else underneath that I was too much of a coward to name." She reached up with her free hand and touched his face, the scar, the line of his cheek, and her touch was not tentative. "It's you, it has always been you. There isn't a date for me either. There's just before I knew you, which I can barely remember, and after, which is all of it." Her eyes were bright and steady. "I love you, not for the crown, not because a wall wrote our names together, because it's true, and it's been true so long that it's part of how I think, and I am done being sensible about it." He rose and drew her up out of the chair, and she came, and in the warm ruin of the candlelight, among the founding books of the oldest house in Britain, with the cold sea sounding beyond the walls, Harry kissed her, and she kissed him back, and it was not tentative and it was not hurried. It was two people arriving at last at a place they had been walking toward for 7 years without ever admitting the direction, and when they drew apart neither of them let go, and neither of them said anything clever. Because there was nothing clever left that needed saying, they stood a while in the firelight, foreheads together, holding on. "There," Hermione said at last, unsteadily against his mouth, "load-bearing, let Ogden test it if he likes." The Keep found out before Ogden did, and the Keep approved. In the morning the household discovered that overnight a door had appeared in a corridor where there had been only wall, opening onto a small round room with 2 chairs and a hearth and a window over the sea. A room the size of exactly 2 people, warm and private and unmistakably new, and Creature, when asked, only bowed and said the Keep made rooms for the keepers it loved, and had not made one in 140 years, and was very pleased with itself. Sirius pretended to be scandalized, and was in fact so delighted he had to leave the breakfast table. Andromeda said nothing at all and looked quietly, deeply satisfied, like a woman whose long patience has finally been rewarded. And Harry and Hermione, who had spent 7 years being careful, found that being uncareful with each other in front of the people who loved them was not the frightening thing they had somehow always assumed it would be, but the easiest thing in the world, a weight each of them had carried alone for years and discovered, once set down, to have been a habit rather than a truth. They held hands at the breakfast table. That was all. It undid nobody and it steadied everybody, and it changed the whole weather of the Keep in the last days before the dark of the moon, so that even with a dying king's threat gathering below them, the household went about its grim preparations warmed by the ordinary sight of 2 people who had finally stopped pretending. The Deep tested it first, and it did not wait for the hall. It came 3 nights before the dark of the moon, in the black hour before dawn, and it came not with an army but with cold. Harry woke to it, the same rotten cold he had felt come up through the black glass of the hall, seeping now through the warded walls of Ravensmoor, and he was up and moving before he was fully awake, and Hermione met him in the corridor already dressed, wand in hand, and Creature came flying up the stairs with his ears flat to his skull, crying that the wards were screaming. The wards were screaming. Something was at the Deep doors. The Keep had its own way down to the hall, an inner stair, and the cold was pouring up it. They went down toward it with the wands lit, and Ron and Bill behind them and Sirius, and at the foot of the inner stair, where the black door of the Keep gave onto the descent to the obsidian hall, they found the thing that had come to test them. It was not Cassius. Cassius could not yet come up. The crowning door was not yet open. It was a herald of him, a scout, a thing of the cold he had sent ahead through whatever crack the wakened heart had left in the world. A shape of frost and shadow gathered on the black door, pressing inward, and where it pressed the silver-veined stone went white and brittle, and the ward's Bill had laid shrieked and buckled. And it spoke in the thin, patient voice from the Deep, the pure old Latin, and now it said more than 2 words. "I feel you," it said in the cold. "The pair. The taking back of what should have stayed thrown away. Do you imagine you are the first the heart has loved? It loved Alara. She died and it wept and it went on. It will weep for you." The frost pressed harder, and a hairline crack ran up the black door, and cold poured through it into the Keep. "Come down before the moon, little keepers. Come down alone and afraid, one of you without the other, and I will make it quick, and the pure boy will wear my crown, and the long insult of your worthiness will be corrected. You cannot hold what I have hungered 400 years to take. You are 2 frightened children. I am a king." Harry stepped up to the cracking door, and he did not shout, and he did not falter, and he put his lit wand and his open hand flat against the cold stone, and Hermione stepped up beside him and put her hand against it too over his, and the keep, feeling the pair of them together at its threshold, woke fully to their touch, every hearth in Ravensmoor flaring at once far above, the whole castle pouring its warmth down the inner stair to the deep door where two keepers stood. "You're not a king," Harry said, quiet and even into the cold. "You're a thief who got caught 400 years ago, and you've been sulking in a hole ever since, and you've got one thing wrong, the same thing you got wrong the first time." Beneath their joined hands the black door stopped cracking. The frost began slowly to recede. "We're not coming down alone, that's the whole point. That's the thing you'll never understand, and it's why the heart threw you in the dark and kept us. You want a crown you can take. We're not taking anything, and you cannot break what we are, because we already tried being apart for 7 years out of cowardice, and it didn't take. So save your cold. We'll see you at the dark of the moon, both of us together. Now get off our door." The warmth of the keep met the cold of the deep at the black door and pushed, and the frost cracked and fell away in sheets, and the thin, patient voice hissed and withdrew, sinking back down the descent toward the hall and the deep beneath it, and the wards, groaning, knit themselves back whole, and the cold was gone, and the inner stair was only stone again, warm now under their hands. They stood at the sealed door in the sudden quiet, the whole company crowded on the stair behind them, and Hermione was still holding Harry's hand against the stone, and she did not let go. "It's afraid of us," she said, wondering. "Did you hear it? It threatened and then it bargained. It wanted us to come down alone because it can't beat us together. Ogden was right, we're load-bearing." She looked at him in the wandlight, and there was in her face the thing they had named 3 nights before and would not now unname. 3 days, Harry, 3 days to the dark of the moon. 3 days, Harry said. He turned from the door and looked up the inner stair at the family crowded there in their nightclothes with their wands lit, Sirius and Ron and Bill, and Andromeda arriving now at the top with Teddy in her arms and Creature and Molly behind them, the whole warm crowd of them who had come north to stand between 2 young keepers and a dead king's hunger. He found Hermione's hand again. "Then we've got 3 days to be ready, and we won't be spending them apart." Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, The Pretender in the Deep. They argued about it for a whole day, and Hermione won, which surprised no one because she was right. "We cannot wait for the crowning," she said. They were gathered in the library, the whole council of them, the founding books open, and Alara listening from her frame above the hearth. "Think about what the crowning is now. Bert brings Cassius's crown into the hall. She puts it on Draco. The moment he reaches to take the heart, Cassius comes up through him, and we are fighting the right and a resurrected king at the same time on the enemy's timing. In the 1 hour we cannot afford to be divided. We would be handing Cassius the exact conditions he needs. A door thrown open, a proud claimant, a crowning already in progress." She looked around the table. "So we don't wait, we go down before the dark of the moon. We go down into the deep now on our terms, and we find the crown, and we deny it to Bert before she can ever bring it into the hall. Take Cassius's weapon off the board before the game even starts." "The deep has never once let a living soul come back up," Ogden said. His old hands were flat on the table. "That is not a caution, it is the whole of the record. In 900 years, the only person cast into the deep who ever returned was Cassius himself, and he did not exactly return, did he? You are proposing to walk into the one place in the House of Black that has no history of releasing what it takes." "Then we don't get taken," Harry said. "We go down, we find the crown, we come back, fast, not to fight him on his ground, just to take the thing that makes him dangerous and get out." He looked at Alara. "You said it, a pair broke him once. We're a pair, and he can't use the crown against us if we've already got it." Alara was quiet in her frame for a long moment. "You cannot destroy the crown in the deep," she said at last. "I will not lie to you and let you go down thinking you can. It is bound to the heart's own stolen light. It can only be unmade above at a true crowning by the heart itself, when the heart takes back what was stolen from it. That is the one place in the 1 hour it can end." Her painted face was grave. "But you can take it, you can carry it up out of the deep and hold it, and if it is in your hands and not Burke's, then she has nothing to crown Draco with, and the crowning becomes only what it should be, a choice between claimants, and the heart will choose you. So yes, going down is sound, but hear me, both of you." Her eyes went from one to the other. "Cassius will not fight you with cold and frost as his herald did. He will fight you with grief, yours. He will show you the thing each of you most cannot bear to have lost, and he will offer it back, and the price will always be the same, though he will dress it 100 ways. The price is the other. He will try to buy one of you with a dead thing you love in exchange for letting go of the living thing you love. Do not pay it. Whatever he shows you, do not pay it." They went down at noon in the full light of the day above, because the founding book said the deep was least strong when the sun stood highest, and they went as a pair with 2 guardians, Sirius, who would not be left behind, and Creature, who could not be. The rest held the keep. Andromeda stood at the black inner door with Teddy on her hip and did not tell them to be careful, because she was not a woman who wasted true things on words, and only touched each of their faces once as they passed, and let them go. The obsidian hall was as they had left it, vast and dark and star-vaulted, the heart burning low above the empty throne. But at the center of the black glass floor, where before there had been only their own reflections and the wheeling of the false stars, there was now a seam. The black glass had opened. A stair went down out of the floor of the hall into a dark below the dark, and the cold came up out of it in a slow exhalation, and the wood smoke smell that had followed them all through the keep was gone, and in its place was the smell of deep water and old drowned iron. That opened itself, Sirius said. His voice was flat. That's not the crowning door. Burke's not here. Why is it open? Because he wants us to come down, Hermione said. He's been inviting us since the first night. Non-digny. Come down alone and afraid. She looked at Harry. It's a trap. We know it's a trap. We're going anyway because the alternative is letting him choose the ground at the crowning instead. A trap we walk into with our eyes open is better than an ambush we don't see coming. At the lip of the seam, with the cold pouring up around their ankles, Harry stopped her, one hand at her elbow, and turned her to face him in the low light of the heart. Whatever he shows me down there, he said quietly, and whatever he shows you, I want you to remember one thing because I have a feeling he's going to make it hard to remember. We already had this argument, years ago, without knowing it. Every time I ran towards something and you came after me instead of staying safe, we already decided, together over safe every time. So when he offers you safe, you'll know it's the wrong answer because we settled it a long time ago. He touched his forehead briefly to hers. I'm not letting go of your hand down there, not for my parents, not for anything. You have my word and you know exactly how much that's worth because you're the one who taught me to keep it. I know what it's worth, Hermione said. Her hand found his and locked. It's worth everything. That's the whole problem with you, Harry. It always has been. Come on, before I lose my nerve and start being sensible again. She looked once at Sirius, steady at their backs, and at Creature, and drew a breath of the cold iron air, and stepped down into the dark with her hand in his, and Harry stepped down beside her, and the seam closed a little above their heads, and the light of the hall narrowed to a line, and then to nothing. They went down into the deep. The stair was longer than the one from the keep, and it went the wrong way, in ways Hermione's careful mind kept trying to measure and could not, the angles of it refusing to add up, the walls closing and opening without pattern, and the cold grew with every step, and the light of their wands seemed to reach less far the deeper they went, until they walked in a bubble of failing brightness through a dark that pressed against it like water against glass. And there were things in the dark that were not quite there. Movement at the edge of the wand light, a pale shape far off that might have been a drowned crown catching a light that should not have reached it, and then gone. The walls, where the light touched them, showed carvings, and the carvings were the history the family had scraped from every register above. Cassius crowned, Cassius reaching, Cassius cast down, the same figure over and over, and beneath every carving the same two words cut deep and filled with frost. Non-digny, not worthy. It was written 1,000 times on the walls of the deep, and Hermione understood, going down past it, that it was not a judgment Cassius had received. It was a wound he had been nursing for 400 years, carving it into the dark again and again, the sentence the heart had passed on him, the thing he could not stop saying because he had never once been able to make himself believe it. The deeper they went, the more the deep showed them of what it was, which was a drowned copy of everything above, a grief's memory of the House of Black, remembered wrong. There were galleries here too, as there were galleries in the keep, but where the keep's deep gallery held the portraits of the cast-out kept safe in their exile, these frames held nothing at all, only black water standing upright in the shapes of paintings, and now and then a face would surface in one of them, mouth open, and sink again before the light could name it. There was a library, its shelves canted and streaming, the books swollen shut with cold, 10,000 volumes no one would ever read, because Cassius had wanted to keep everything and had let none of it live. The floor underfoot was not glass but ice, black ice a fathom thick, and under it, far down, things moved that had the shape of the drowned. It was, Harry thought, going down through it with Hermione's hand locked in his and Sirius and Creature close behind, the loneliest place he had ever been, and he had grown up in a cupboard, and he understood that the loneliness was the point, that this was what a love turned into a possession finally became, a great cold house full of everything a man had tried to keep, and no one left in it to keep it for. At the bottom of the stair, the deep opened into a hall that was a drowned mirror of the hall above. The same black columns but broken, canted, furred with something pale, the same star vault overhead but the stars in it were dead, cold points of gray, the same dais of 7 steps and the same throne, and on the throne sat a king. He had been a big man once. The shape of that was still in him, in the ruin of the robes and the set of the shoulders, but the substance had gone out of him over 400 years and left a thing of shadow and frost and terrible patient will, seated on the drowned throne with a dull dark crown resting in his lap under his folded hands, and when the wand light fell on him he lifted his head, and where his face should have been there was grief, worn into a shape that had almost forgotten it was a face. "You came," said Cassius Black in the thin patient voice. "The pair, I did not think you would be brave enough or foolish enough. They are the same thing at your age, I remember." his ruined head tilted. Sit, no, you will not sit. You have come for the crown. Of course you have. Everyone comes for the crown in the end. It is the only thing down here worth coming for. His hands moved on the dark metal in his lap. Come and take it then, if you can, if you are worthy. And the two words that were carved 1,000 times on the walls around them hung unspoken in the cold. Non digni. He went for Harry first. The deep changed. The drowned hall did not vanish, but it thinned, went transparent, and through it Harry saw a room, warm, ordinary, lamplit, a room he had never stood in and knew in his bones all the same, because there were two people in it. A man with untidy black hair and a woman with red hair and green eyes, young, alive, arguing cheerfully over something, and they turned toward him when he came in, and the woman's face opened with a joy that hit him below the ribs, and she said his name. Harry, said James Potter, grinning, alive. There you are, we've been waiting. I know it is cheap, said Cassius's voice from very far away and very close. I know you can see the seams. You are not a fool, and I am not offering you a dream, boy. I am offering you the thing itself. The crown I hold can do this. It is made of the heart's own power over life and death and love, and in the hands of one who will use it, truly use it. It can reach back and take what death took and give it to you again. Your father, not shades, not paintings, them, warm, arguing over the washing up, growing old in that room while you watch, all the years that were stolen from you, given back. I can give you your family, Harry Potter, the real one, the first one. All you have to do is take the crown and let go of the girl, because the crown will hold only one, and its hold is not the fragile two-hand thing the heart offers. It is a hold that cannot be broken by any fever, any war, any veil. Take it, and no one you love will ever die again. Is that not worth a mudblood's hand? Is that not worth everything? And Lily Potter held out her arms, and it was not a painting, and it was not a dream, and Harry felt the whole crushing weight of 20 years of wanting come down on him at once. The cupboard and the graveyard and every birthday no one came to, and the one photograph in the mirror at 11 that had shown him this exact room and this exact face, and his hand, the hand that was not holding Hermione's, rose a little toward the warm, impossible room. Then he heard Hermione beside him in the cold say his name, just his name, not a warning, not an argument, not one of the 1,000 brilliant things she could have said. Just Harry, low, steady, present, her voice out of the real dark and her hand tightening in his, and Harry came back to himself with the warm room still open in front of him and his mother's arms still held out, and he looked at it, and he did not let go of Hermione's hand, and he spoke to the thing on the throne without turning from the room. You had a pair, Harry said. Ilara told us. You loved someone and she died of a fever and it broke you, and you built a crown to make sure you'd never have to feel it again. So you of all people know exactly what you're offering me. Not my parents back, a crown that never lets go, a love that can't die because it isn't love anymore, it's just holding. His hand stayed in Hermione's. My mum died holding on to me. That's the whole reason I'm alive. She chose me over her own life, and it wasn't a hold that couldn't be broken. It was a hold that broke on purpose, for love. You want me to trade that, the realest thing that ever happened to me, for a crown that would have made her sacrifice impossible? He looked at the warm room, at his mother's face, and it cost him, and he did it. You're not my family. My family's behind me on the stairs and beside me in the dark and back up in that keep making too much dinner. You're a grief in a crown. And I'm sorry for you, I mean that, but no. He closed his hand hard around Hermione's. The answer's no, put the room away, it's cruel and it's beneath even you. The warm room guttered and went out, and the cold rushed back, and James and Lily Potter were gone as though they had never been, and Cassius Black sat on his drowned throne and made a sound that might, in a thing that had once been a man, have been the beginning of a sob or of a laugh or of both. It had cost him. Hermione felt it in his hand, the fine tremor running through it, the price of turning away from his mother's living arms twice over, and she did not let go and did not speak, because there was nothing to say that would not make it smaller than it was. Harry had spent his whole life being told to be grateful for scraps and had just refused a feast, and had done it not because he did not want it, but because he wanted the true thing more, and Hermione understood, holding his shaking hand in the cold, that she had watched him do the single hardest thing she had ever seen a person do, which was to look at everything he had ever ached for and choose the harder love over the easier ache. She pressed her thumb once across his knuckles, the small private signal that had passed between them for years, were all right, and felt him steady, and knew the cost of it would come due later in some ordinary quiet moment weeks from now, the way such costs always did, and resolved privately to be there when it did. Then the girl, said Cassius, the girl who tells you no with one word, let us see what the clever one is made of. The deep changed again, and this time it was Hermione. The drowned hall thinned around, and Harry felt her hand go rigid in his, and he could not see what she saw, because Cassius had made it for her alone, but he saw her face, and her face was enough. I am not offering you the dead, Cassius said, and now the patient voice had gentled, had turned itself toward her, reasonable, almost kind, the voice of one clever, grieving person to another. You are too sensible to be bought with ghosts. I have watched you, daughter of Iola. You do not fear death. You fear something worse, and you have never said it aloud, not to him, not to yourself, because saying it would make it real. You fear losing him. That is the crack in you. Everything you are, all that fierce control, the lists you make, the books you master, the arguments you never lose, all of it is a wall you have built against the one thing you cannot control, which is that you love a man who runs toward every danger in the world, and one day one of them will not let him come back, and you will be left, as I was left, holding a sovereignty meant for two hands in one hand alone. The dull crown turned in his lap. I can fix that. That is what I built this for. Not to bring back the dead, to make sure you never join their number of the bereaved. Take the crown, and your love for him becomes a thing that cannot be taken from you by any veil or curse or war. Not a fragile beating heart that fever can stop. A bond of the deep magic, fixed, certain, unbreakable, yours. You would never lose him. You would never stand where I stood. You would never carve non-dignity into a wall for 400 years because the one you chose was taken and you could not follow. I am offering you certainty, Hermione Granger, the one thing all your cleverness has never been able to buy. Is that not worth more than a freely given love that any Tuesday could end? And Harry watched Hermione's face and saw that this was the true trap, the one built for the specific shape of her, and saw her want it because it was aimed at the deepest true fear in her. And he did not say her name because Alara had said do not pay it, and he understood that this was hers to answer, and that reaching in would be its own kind of not trusting her. So he only held her hand and let her feel that he was there and waited and trusted her, which was the hardest thing and the only right one. Hermione stood in the cold with the drowned king's certainty held out to her, and she was quiet for a long moment, and then she laughed once unsteadily, and it was not a happy sound, but it was a real one. You've done your research, she said. That's exactly it. That's the fear I've never said out loud. Well done. She drew a breath. But you've made the same mistake you made 400 years ago, and you can't see it, because you've been alone in the dark so long you've forgotten what the thing even is. She looked at the crown and then past it, at the ruined, grieving shape on the throne. You think love is the wanting. You think if you could just secure the person, fix them in place so they can't be lost, you'd have the thing itself and be safe. But that's not it. That was never it. Love isn't having someone so they can't be taken. Love is choosing them freely, knowing they can be taken, and choosing them anyway every day without the guarantee. The choosing is the whole of it. If you take away the risk, you don't get a safer love. You get no love at all. You get a possession. You get exactly what you got, a crown and a throne in the dark and 400 years alone. Her hand was steady in Harry's now. I would rather have him for one Tuesday freely, knowing I could lose him, than have your certainty forever, because your certainty isn't him. It's a thing shaped like him that can't leave, and I don't want a thing that can't leave. I want the man who chooses to stay. That's the difference between us, Cassius. You wanted to be safe, I want to be loved. You can't have both, and you chose wrong, and you've had 400 years to find out. She lifted her chin, Ola's chin. So no, keep your certainty. I'll take my Tuesdays. And Harry, who had trusted her to answer it alone, and had waited in an agony of not reaching while she did, felt something in his chest come loose at the sound of her choosing him over her own deepest fear, out loud, to a dead king, with nothing to gain by it but the truth. He had known she loved him. He had not known until he heard her say it into the teeth of the exact terror built to break her, quite how far down it went, and he understood that he had just been given a gift he would spend a lifetime being worthy of, and that Cassius, who counted everything, had handed it to him for free by trying to take it away. The vision she alone could see went out, and Hermione swayed, and Harry caught her, and Cassius Black rose from his throne for the first time in 400 years. Rose, and the deep rose with him, the cold sharpening to something that could cut, the dead stars overhead flaring gray, and the dull crown came up in his ruined hands, and the patient voice was patient no longer. Then you are worthy, said Cassius, and it was the worst thing he could have said, and he said it as a curse. You are worthy, and I am not, and I have known it for 400 years, and I have carved it on every wall of this place because I could not make myself believe the sentence was just. And now here you are, the living proof of it, two children who did in 1 minute in the dark what I could not do with a lifetime and a crown. Worthy, chosen, loved. The crown blazed dark in his hands. Do you know what that is to the not chosen? Do you know what it is to be the one the heart wept for and went on without? I will not be gone on without again. If I cannot have the crown, if I cannot be worthy, then I will make certain the worthy do not have it either. You came to take my weapon. Let me show you what my weapon does to a pair. And he did not attack Harry, and he did not attack Hermione. He struck between them. The cold drove into the space where their two hands were joined, a wedge of it, precise and ancient and aimed with 400 years of study at the one seam in any pair, the place where two people become two people again, and it was strong, stronger than the herald at the door had been, strong enough that Harry felt his own hand begin to open against his will, felt the join begin to fail, felt the whole crushing loneliness of the deep pour into the widening gap, and he heard Hermione cry out. And he could not hold on, and Sirius Black stepped into the gap. He had been behind them the whole descent, silent, watching, a guardian who had spent his whole life failing to protect the people he loved and had one chance left to do it right. And when the wedge of cold drove between Harry and Hermione, Sirius did not hesitate, did not calculate, did not do anything but move, throwing himself into the space between them with his own body and his own wand and his own fierce, battered love, and he caught the strike meant to break the pair. And it broke over him instead. "Not this time," Sirius said through the cold to the drowned king. "You want to break a family in this house? You're 400 years too late, mate. This family's already been broken every way there is. Turns out we just keep choosing each other anyway." He held the gap, one man alone in the place where the pair should have failed, holding it closed with the whole of himself so that Harry's hand found Hermione's again across the bridge of him. And the join held, and the wedge of cold could not widen, because there was a body in it that would not move, and Cassius, howling now, poured everything into breaking the one man who had put himself in the way. The crown was in Cassius's hands, and it was undefended, because he had committed all of himself to the strike. And Creature, who no one had been watching, who had crept along the drowned wall in the dark while the king raged, leapt. The old elf seized the dull dark crown out of the king's ruined hands with a shriek of 100, and some years of loyalty finally given its moment, and Cassius spun, and the cold turned on the elf, and Creature held the crown to his chest and cried, "Creature has it. Master, Creature has the thief's crown. Take them up now." And Harry, with Hermione's hand in one of his and his godfather sagging against the other, understood that the moment was now or never, and he did the hardest thing, which was to run. He got Hermione under one arm and Sirius under the other, and Creature came behind with the crown clutched to him, and they went up the impossible stair out of the deep with the whole drowned hall screaming behind them and Cassius's voice chasing them up, no longer patient, no longer kind, only a 400-year-old grief that had lost even its weapon. It changes nothing. The crown comes to the crowning. It will find a head to sit on. You cannot unmake it in the dark. I will see you at the dark of the moon, and I will not be alone, and neither will you be worthy then. They came up through the seam in the black glass into the obsidian hall, and the seam sealed itself behind them, and they were out of the deep alive with the crown, and it should have been a victory. Sirius was not moving. He had taken the strike meant to break the pair, taken it full and alone, and the cold of the deep had gone into him, and he lay on the black glass floor of the obsidian hall with his eyes half open and his skin gone gray and a rime of frost in his dark hair that would not melt. And when Harry got down beside him and took his face in both hands, the frost was cold as the deep itself under his fingers, and Sirius's breath came slow and slower a long way apart. "Sirius, Sirius, look at me. We're up, we're out, we got the crown, we did it, you did it, now you have to." Harry's voice cracked and he did not care. "Creature, get Andromeda, get anyone, run, Harry." Sirius's voice was a thread. His eyes found his godson's face and stayed there, and there was in them no fear at all, only a fierce and failing tenderness. "Did it hold, the two of you, the join, did it hold?" "It held," Harry said. "Because of you, you held it. Now hold on, you stubborn stay. Sirius, you don't get to do this, you're not allowed." "It held." Sirius smiled, gray-lipped, and his cold hand came up and found Harry's and gripped it with the last of what he had. "That's the whole game, you know, that's the only thing I ever wanted, for the two of you to have the thing they wouldn't let me have, a pair that holds." His eyes moved to Hermione, kneeling white-faced on his other side, and the smile reached her. "Look after him, he runs toward things. You already know." His grip loosened. "Tell Moony, tell him I finally saw the keep. Tell him it was everything we—" The cold took him down into a stillness that was not death, not quite, not yet, but was a long way from life, and Sirius Black lay on the floor of the hall of his fathers with frost in his hair and did not speak again. And above them the heart of Black flared once in grief, and far below in the sealed deep the drowned king laughed because he had lost his crown and taken a guardian in its place, and to a thing made of 400 years of grief. That was a trade worth making. Andromeda came at a run with Molly behind her, and they worked over him there on the black glass, and they held the cold at bay barely, and did not lose him quite, but could not wake him and could not warm him. And Ogden, arriving last and slowest, took one look at the frost that would not melt in the gray stillness, and said in a voice gone hollow that this was the cold of the deep itself, that no healer living had the art of it, that the only fire old enough to thaw it was the heart. And the heart could not be asked to spend itself on a healing 3 days before it would need everything it had for a crowning. They bore him up out of the hall and into the keep, and laid him by the greatest fire in it, and the fire did not warm him, and the frost in his hair did not melt, and the iron box with the thief's crown in it they set on the floor beside his bed, dull and dark and patient, having cost them the one guardian who had held the whole family together. Andromeda would not leave his side. Molly kept the fire fed past all reason, and Harry sat on the floor by his godfather with his back against the bed and did not move for a long time, and Hermione sat beside him and did not tell him it would be all right because she did not lie to him and never had. Belvina Burke came to the gates of Ravensmoor that same night. She did not come to attack. She came, she said, standing alone on the headland in the wind off the Black Sea with her pale eyes calm, to offer terms, and the keep would not let her past its wards, so she stood outside them and spoke, and her voice carried across the heather with no trouble at all, because it was not entirely her own voice that carried it. "I felt your victory," she said, up at the lit windows where Harry stood looking down at her with Hermione's hand in his. "You took the crown, clever children. You went down into the deep and you came up again, which no one has done, and you brought the thief's crown out with you, and you have it in an iron box by your godfather's bed, and you think it means something. Her head tilted, and the movement was not hers, was older and colder than a woman of 60. It means nothing, did he not tell you? The crown comes to the crowning, it will find a head. You can lock the metal in a box, but the metal is only a vessel for cannot be boxed. And at the dark of the moon, when you open that hall for your coronation, the deep opens with it, and what waits in the deep comes up, and it does not need the metal in your box to do it. You did not disarm me, you only carried my weapon closer to the battle. She smiled, and the smile was 400 years old. And you spent a guardian to do it. How is dear Sirius? Cold, I think. The cold of the deep does not thaw. He will lie by your fire and slip lower and lower, and you will have to choose at the crowning whether to spend the heart's strength on saving him or on winning the throne, and you cannot do both, and that choice, children, is the crown I am truly bringing to your coronation. Not the metal, the choice. Save the man you love or save the house. You will not have breath for both. Get off our land, Harry said, and his voice did not shake, though everything in him did. I am on no one's land. I am giving you the truth, which is more than your side has ever given mine. The thing wearing Belvina Burke turned to go and paused and looked back up, and for a moment the pale eyes were almost gentle, almost sorrowful, and the voice under her voice was the patient one from the deep. I was worthy once, you know, before the fever. I tended it well. Remember that when you stand in the hall and it comes for you. I was worthy once, and it wept for me, and it went on, and worth is a thing the world takes back. It will take yours too. It always does, non digni, all of us in the end. And she walked away down the headland into the dark and was gone, and the wind came in off the sea and rattled the old windows of Ravensmoor, and inside, by the great fire, Sirius Black slipped a little lower, and the frost in his hair did not melt. Harry did not speak for a long time after she had gone. He sat on the floor with his back against Sirius's bed and Sirius's cold hand in his, and the choice Burke had left in the room sat on his chest like a stone, and it was Ogden of all of them who broke the silence, because Ogden had spent 60 years refusing to let a lie stand unchallenged and would not start now. She wants you to believe it is a choice between two doors, the old man said low from his chair by the fire. Save the man or save the house. It is the oldest trick in every dark things book to narrow the world down to two doors, both of which it has already chosen for you. Do not walk through either of them. That is the whole of my advice, and it is worth more than it sounds. He looked at Alara's frame, which had been carried up from the library and hung now by the fire so the first keeper could watch over the guardian who had fallen. First keeper, you held this heart 900 years ago. Is it true the heart cannot heal him without spending what it needs for the crowning, or is that only what a frightened old man deduced from books written by liars? Alara was quiet. Then, the heart does not divide its strength into a jar for healing and a jar for crowning, she said slowly. That is a thief's way of thinking, Cassius's way, everything counted and hoarded. The heart is not a jar, it is a well. It gives what it gives to the ones it is held by, and the more truly it is held, the more it has to give. Her painted eyes moved to Harry and Hermione. Burke told you a truth shaped like a trap. She said you cannot spend the heart on both, but she assumes you will be spending it, taking from it, drawing it down like water from a bucket, one dipper for the man and one for the throne, and never enough for two. That is how Cassius would use it. That is not how a true keeper uses it at all. She leaned forward in her frame. A true pair does not take from the heart. A true pair is held by it and gives to it, and a heart that is truly held has more to give than any single trouble can drain. I will not promise you Sirius can be saved. I have been a painting for 900 years and I promise nothing. But I will tell you Burke lied about the shape of the choice, because a dark thing always lies about the shape of the choice. Do not accept her arithmetic. There may be no third door. But there is never only two. Hermione lifted her head from where it had rested against Harry's shoulder, and something came back into her face that had gone out of it in the deep, the scholar's fire, the refusal to accept a problem's own account of itself. Received, not taken, she said quietly, half to herself, and Harry felt her hand tighten in his. That's it, isn't it? That's what Luna found in the margin. Cassius takes. Burke thinks in dippers and jars because she's carrying Cassius. But the whole point of us, the whole reason the heart wanted a pair, is that we don't take. We receive and we give, and a thing that's given multiplies where a thing that's taken runs out. She sat up straight. She thinks she's handing us an impossible choice. She's handing us the answer and doesn't know it. We don't choose between Sirius and the house. We refuse to take from the heart at all. We let it hold us, and we hold each other, and we give it back everything it gives, and we find out together whether a well that's truly held runs deeper than one old grief in a crown thinks it does. She looked at Harry and at the family crowded in the firelight and at Sirius gray and still between them. We've got 2 days. Let's stop grieving and start reading. There's a way through this that isn't either of her doors, and it's in these books somewhere, and I am done losing arguments to a dead man. So the last days before the dark of the moon began to run out over a wounded keep, and no one in it slept well. Outside the windows of Ravensmoor, the moon, waning thin toward the dark, 3 days out, then 2, and the enemy held a wounded field, and Burke's term sat in the room like a fourth presence. Save the man you love or save the house, and you will not have breath for both. The pair that had gone down to win had come up carrying a victory that felt, in the gray firelight over Sirius's still face, exactly like a defeat. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The contested crown. They found the answer at 3 in the morning on the last night, and it was Hermione who found it, and Luna, and a footnote no pureblood scholar had ever thought worth reading. It had cost 2 days of searching to get there, 2 days that felt like 2 years. The household turned over to a single desperate question while Sirius slipped lower by the hour in the next room. They read everything. Hermione set the founding books against Ogden's memory, against Alara's 900-year account, against the Doomsday Ledger, cross-checking every line, chasing every contradiction, and Ron sat opposite her, turning the enemy's position over and over like a chessboard he refused to lose, and Bill traced the architecture of the old magic with a cursebreaker's patience, and Neville read marriage law, and Luna read the right upside down and backward and sideways, and still the answer would not come because they were all, without knowing it, looking for a way to win, and the answer was not a way to win at all. Burke had set them a trap with 2 doors, save the man or save the house, and for 2 days the whole exhausted household had beaten itself bloody against the 2 doors, trying to force a third, and had found only wall. It was Luna's word in the margin that finally turned them, received where everyone had read taken, and once Hermione saw it she could not unsee it, and the whole shape of the thing came apart and reassembled in her mind in the space of a single breath, and she sat bolt upright at 3 in the morning with the answer blazing in her. "Here," Hermione said, and her voice cracked the exhausted quiet of the library, where half the family had fallen asleep over the books and the other half had given up pretending to read them. "Here, the founding right has a 4th offering. Nobody uses it because nobody understood it, and the pureblood copies cut it out entirely, but Alara's original keeps it, and Luna's right about the word again, it's the same root, received." She turned the ancient page toward the firelight, her finger under a line of script so old the letters swam. "There are 3 offerings the claimant makes to the heart: blood, name, will. Everyone knows those, but the true right has a 4th, and it doesn't go from the claimant to the heart, it goes the other way. The keepers can offer the heart's own strength onward to a 3rd freely as a gift, not spend it, give it. A true pair, once the heart has come down into them, can pass its warmth to someone else in the room, and because it's given and not taken, the well doesn't run dry, it deepens." She looked up, and her eyes were bright and fierce and awake. "That's how we save Sirius, not by stealing a healing from the heart before the crowning and hoping there's enough left. By being crowned first, letting the heart truly hold us, and then giving its warmth to him freely in front of everyone as the first act of our keeping. Burke's whole trap is the word take. She never once imagined we might give." The library came awake around her. Ron, who had fallen asleep with his face on a procedural record, lifted his head and was instantly wholly present, the strategist waking to a board he could suddenly read. Bill leaned over the ancient page with his cursebreaker's frown and traced the 4th offering with one careful finger, and said it was sound, that the structure of the magic held, that a gift given in old magic did not deplete the giver the way a spell cast did, that it was, in fact, the single most efficient working he had ever seen described, and no one had used it in 400 years, because no one had wanted to give anything away. Andromeda, keeping her long vigil by Sirius in the next room, heard the change in the voices and came to the doorway with hope naked on her face for the first time since the deep. And Alara, in her frame above the hearth, who had watched every keeper of the House of Black for 900 years and had seen the great gift forgotten and the great theft remembered in its place, closed her painted eyes for a moment, and when she opened them they were bright. "You have found it," the first keeper said softly. "The thing I built the whole house to do, and they scraped it out of the right because it made them feel poor to imagine giving instead of keeping. Yes, that is the crowning, not to be crowned and hold it against the world, to be crowned and pour it out. I made the heart to be a well, children, not a hoard, and a well is only worth having if you let people drink from it. Go and remind the House of Black what it was for." Ogden, who had not slept in 3 days, put his old face in his hands, and when he lifted it he looked 10 years younger. "That is either the finest reading of the founding right in 4 centuries, he said, "or the last mistake any of us will ever make, and I find, Merlin help me, that I believe it. It is exactly the answer Cassius could never see, because a thief cannot conceive of a gift." He rose, stiff, and reached for his hat. "Then we do not go down to that hall to choose between the man and the house. We go down to be crowned and to heal him with the crowning, and to do in 1 act the thing Burke swore we could not do in 2, wake the household. It is the dark of the moon tonight, and we have a coronation to attend, and we are going to win it by giving something away." Harry spent the last hour of the afternoon with Sirius. He sent the others away gently, and Hermione took them because she understood, and he sat on the floor by the bed with his back against it and his godfather's cold hand in his, and watched the gray light fail over the northern sea through the tall window, and he talked. He did not know if Sirius could hear him. Ogden said the cold of the deep left a man neither in the world nor out of it, and Harry chose to believe that the part of Sirius that had spent a lifetime refusing to be shut out of anything was in there somewhere listening, so he talked. "I found out something about you," he said. That you built a whole keep in your head when you were 9, dogs in the hall and children on the stairs and nobody burned off any wall. And I've been thinking about it because that's not a black talking, that's not Tauger's purr. That's a little boy who already knew what a family was supposed to be before anyone had ever shown him one. His thumb moved over the cold knuckles. You showed me, that's the thing I never said. Everyone thinks you gave me a godfather and you did, but that's not the important part. The important part is you gave me the idea that I could have people, that I wasn't a thing that got left in cupboards. You were the first person who ever wanted me, and you did it out of Azkaban, half mad with nothing, and it worked, because here I am about to go get crowned in your family's hall with a woman I love and a family too big for the room, and I built all of it on you deciding once that I was worth breaking out of prison for. His voice was steady. He had decided it would be. So you don't get to go, that's the deal. We're going to get crowned, and the very first thing we do with it, before the house, before anything, we're bringing it up here and giving it to you, because you gave me everything first and it's about time somebody gave it back. Just hold on one more night. You've held on through worse, hold on for the part that's finally good. He sat a while longer in the failing light. Then he leaned up and pressed his forehead briefly to Sirius's cold brow and rose, and found Hermione waiting in the corridor, and she did not ask what he had said, only took his hand, and they went to dress for a coronation. She had found robes for them both in the keep's deep wardrobes, black, unornamented, older than the compact of 1712, the plain robes of keepers from before the family had learned to gild itself, and when they stood together in them at the head of the inner stair, they did not look like a lord and a lady of a great house. It looked like what Alara had described 900 years ago, two people who had chosen each other, plainly dressed, come to stand between the world and a wild old power. Hermione reached up and straightened the collar of Harry's robes where it had folded, an ordinary fussing gesture, the same one she had made on the steps of the ministry, and it steadied them both. Whatever's down there, she said, we already know how it ends between us. That part's not in doubt anymore, and it never will be again. Everything else will work out as we go. She took his hand. Come on, it's the dark of the moon. They gathered in the great hall of the keep at dusk, and the found family had grown because word had gone out, and the ones who loved Harry and Hermione had come north through the last of the light to stand with them. Remus Lupin arrived first, grey and drawn, and he went straight to the room where Sirius lay grey and still. And he knelt by his oldest friend and took the cold hand and said something no one else heard. And when he came out, his eyes were red and his jaw was steady, and he took his place among the fighters without a word, because Sirius had told Harry to tell Moony he had finally seen the keep, and Moony had come to see it too, and to make certain that whatever happened in the hall below. The last of the marauders did not fall alone. Tonks came behind him, Andromeda's daughter, her hair gone a fierce, determined red, and she kissed her mother and her sleeping son and cracked her knuckles and said the first thing that had made anyone laugh in 2 days, which was that she had always wanted to punch a Malfoy in a formal setting, and it appeared her moment had come. They came, all of them. Bill and Fleur, Arthur and the Weasley sons, Kingsley in his minister's robes with a face like a thundercloud and a wand he had not drawn in anger since the war. Minerva McGonagall, who had taught half the room and buried too many of the rest and did not intend to bury any more tonight. Neville, with his grandmother's old sword cane and a satchel of plants that Hermione had learned never to underestimate. Luna, calm as still water, who alone of all of them did not look afraid. And the ones who lived in the keep already, Molly, who would guard Teddy and the wounded with a ladle if it came to it and would very likely win. Andromeda, who would not, Creature, who had carried a king's crown out of the deep and would carry a great deal more before the night was done. Harry stood before them all in the firelight, and he was not good at speeches and did not try to give one. I'm not going to pretend I know how this ends, he said. Sirius is dying in the next room because we went down once already, and I'm not going to insult any of you by pretending tonight is safer than that was. It isn't. Ogden thinks a contested crowning can kill the claimants who lose, and one of the claimants down there is going to be carrying 400 years of a dead king's grief, and the woman running it wants us divided and afraid and alone. He found Hermione's hand. So here's the plan, and it's a strange one, and Hermione worked it out so it's right. We are not going down there to fight for a crown. We're going down there to be given one and then to give it away. The whole of it. To Sirius first to heal him, and then to this house to remake it, and then to any of you it can reach, because that's what the heart actually wants, and it's the one thing Cassius Black has never once understood in 400 years of wanting it. He looked around the firelit hall at the faces of everyone he loved. Lucius thinks a crowning is a man alone on a throne. Burke thinks it's a theft you have to be strong enough to commit. They're both wrong, and they're wrong in the same way, and we're going to show them, all of us together, exactly how wrong. He's bringing a dead king and a stolen crown. We're bringing a family. I still like our odds. He drew a breath. Nobody goes down there alone. That's the only rule. Whatever happens in that hall, you keep hold of the person next to you. Now come on. It's the dark of the moon, and they're waiting, and I'm done making them wait. No one cheered. It was not that sort of room, and it was not that sort of family. But Kingsley Shacklebolt, Minister for Magic, put his fist to his heart in the old Auror's salute once to two people less than half his age, and McGonagall inclined her head the precise fraction she had inclined it to no student in 50 years, and Ron said, right then, in the flat, practical voice he used when a plan had stopped being frightening and become simply a list of things to do, and began telling people where to stand on the descent. Molly kissed Harry's cheek and Hermione's forehead and told them both to keep their scarves on down there, as if the enemy were a head cold, and the ordinary impossible love of it steadied the whole room more than any speech could have. Andromeda came last, with Teddy handed off now to a warded nursery above and her hands free for a wand, and she took Harry's face in one hand and Hermione's in the other, the two young keepers she had claimed as her own on the doorstep of a haunted house weeks and a lifetime ago, and she said, "My whole family spent 300 years being the thing everyone feared. Go and make it the thing everyone comes home to. That is the only inheritance worth having, and it has taken us 1,000 years and 2 cast-out children to find it. Go and take it up." Then she let them go, and they went, the whole company of them, down the inner stair into the dark, and the keep closed its warm doors behind them, and there was nothing left between the House of Black and its true crowning but 7 black steps and a dead king. The obsidian hall was full of light and full of enemies. They came down the inner stair into it, the whole company, and the hall had been prepared for a coronation. The false stars wheeled overhead. The heart burned above the empty throne, higher and brighter than Harry had seen it, wakeful waiting, for the dark of the moon had come and it knew its hour. And ranged across the black glass floor were the appointed witnesses of the Wizengamot, grave and frightened in their plum robes, and the council of cousins, and at the foot of the dais in black and silver stood the Malfoys. It was a stranger sight than any of the Wizengamot's witnesses had been prepared for, and several of them had gone gray with it. They had come expecting a ceremony, some quaint survival of the old families, a matter of parchment and precedent dressed up in a little harmless pageantry, and they had descended instead into a cathedral of night at the root of the world, a hall so vast their conjured lights could not find its ceiling, a floor of black glass that gave back a sky of wheeling stars beneath their own feet, and a wellspring of dark fire burning above an empty throne that made the oldest and hardest of them feel, without quite knowing why, that they had come uninvited into a temple and ought to lower their voices. They stood in a nervous huddle near the arch, the appointed witnesses of magical Britain, and they watched the 2 young keepers come down the inner stair in their plain black robes, and not one of them, whatever they had believed on the way down, could look at the heart of black burning wakeful over the throne and go on believing that the choosing of its keeper was a matter for a courtroom. The hall itself argued otherwise. The hall had been arguing it for 1,000 years. Lucius was pale and certain and did not yet know he had already lost, because he still believed the fight was his. Narcissa stood a half-step behind her husband with her eyes fixed on her son and her hands not still. And Draco stood at the very foot of the 7 black steps, dressed for a crowning, white to the lips and in his hands uncovered now, the dull dark thing that was not the crown they had taken from the deep, because there had been 2 all along, or the one had made a shadow of itself, or Hermione understood with a cold lurch, because it had never mattered which metal Draco held, because the crown was not the metal, the crown was the thing in the deep. And it would wear any circlet that a proud enough head would lift. And beside Draco, one hand resting light on his shoulder, stood Belvina Burke, and she was smiling, and the thing behind her pale eyes had come very close to the surface now, so close that the frost was already forming on the black glass around her feet. "You came," Burke said, and it was mostly the drowned voice now, thin and patient and vast. "Both of you together, as always, how touching, how predictable. Ogden, you old fool, will you open the right, or shall I?" "I will open it," Ogden said, and his voice did not shake, "because I am the keeper of the register and it is my office, and I will not surrender 1 inch of the forms to you, whatever you are wearing tonight." He struck the black glass with his staff, and the sound of it rang through the vast hall, and the heart above the throne flared in answer. "By the ancient law of the House of Black, witnessed and enforced by the Wizengamot of Great Britain, we are come to the crowning. 2 claims stand, Harry Potter and Hermione Granger, recognized by the heart, Draco Malfoy of the pure line of Narcissa, born black. The heart of black will choose its keeper before these witnesses, and the choice will be final. Claimants, present yourselves to the seat of stars." His old eyes went to Burke, hard as flint. "One warning I give, as the law requires. The crowning is not the recognition. The heart chooses the worthy and unmakes the false, and the false do not walk away. Any claimant who reaches to take rather than to receive reaches at the peril of their soul. Descend accordingly." "Oh," said the thing wearing Belvina Burke, "we intend to," and she opened the deep. She did not need a stair or a seam. She lifted her free hand, and the black glass of the hall floor went white with frost from the dais outward, and beneath it the ice cracked, and the cold of the deep came up not through a door but through the whole floor at once, pouring into the obsidian hall, and the wood-smoke warmth of the heart guttered and shrank back, and the wheeling stars of the vault dimmed, and out of the cracking frost rose the drowned things, the pale half-shapes that had moved under the ice of the deep. The memory of every black who had died alone and unmourned, rising now at the call of the king who had gathered them, and the witnesses of the Wisengamot screamed and scattered, and the sanctioned coronation of the House of Black became, in the space of a breath, a battle. Hold, Harry roared over the chaos, hold the line, don't let them divide us, keep hold of each other, and the found family, who had come north for exactly this and had been told exactly one rule, closed ranks on the black glass and held. It was a battle unlike any of them had fought, because the cold did not attack the body, it attacked the bonds between them. It went for the seams, for the spaces between people, pouring loneliness into every gap, and where two fighters stood apart it drove them further apart, and where a person stood alone it swallowed them. But this family did not fight alone, because they had been told not to, and because it was true to what they were, and so they fought in pairs and in chains, hand gripping hand, Remus and Tonks back to back with their wands blazing, Bill and Fleur, Arthur and Molly, who had left Teddy warded in the keep above and come down to stand with her children, the Weasley brothers in a knot, Neville and Luna, Kingsley and McGonagall, each of them anchored to another, none of them alone. And the cold broke against the linked line of them and could not find a seam to widen, because there were no seams, because a family that chooses each other is a wall with no cracks in it for a lonely thing to pry. Andromeda fought her way to the front and faced the drowned shapes and did not flinch, and she called them by name, the disowned and the forgotten, Marius and Cedrella and all the burned-off dead, and she cried out to them that they were remembered, that the exile was ended, that a daughter of the cast-out lines had come home and the house would be theirs again, and some of the pale shapes faltered at their own names spoken with love. Because Cassius had gathered them with the promise that no one would ever mourn them, and here was a woman mourning them, and the loneliness that bound them cracked. They each found their part, and none of them fought it alone. Neville Longbottom went to the front of the line with his grandmother's sword cane and his satchel, and he flung fistfuls of some silvered seed across the black glass, and where the seeds struck the spreading frost they took root and grew, impossible, a hedge of living green thorn bursting up through the ice, warmth against the cold, and the drowned shapes recoiled from the growing things, because nothing had grown in the deep for 400 years, and life itself was an argument they could not answer. Luna walked beside him unhurried, humming, and she did not fight the drowned dead at all. She talked to them softly, told them the names of stars they had forgotten, told them it was all right to stop, and one by one the pale shapes nearest her voice sank back into the ice and did not rise again, laid to rest by the one person in the hall who had never once in her life been frightened of the dead. Kingsley Shacklebolt and Minerva McGonagall fought back to back at the center of the line, the minister and the head mistress, two of the most formidable duelists alive, and where they stood the cold could not advance a foot, their conjured fire meeting the frost in a hissing wall of steam that lit the dark hall gold. The Weasleys fought in a knot as they had always done, Arthur and his sons, a wall of red hair and blazing wands, and Molly stood at the heart of them with a fury in her that the frost broke against and could not cross, because she had buried one son to war already and had come down into the dark to make certain she buried no one else's tonight. Bill's Cursebreaker's eye found the seams in Cassius's own magic, and Fleur's silver spells poured through them. Remus and Tonks fought as one creature, wolf quick and clumsy graceful, mother's fierce joy and father's grey grief braided into a single blazing defense, and above the battle Tonks's hair burned the exact fierce red of a woman who had promised her sleeping son she would come back up. And creature, small and ancient and utterly without fear now, went where the fighters could not, darting under the cold along the black glass, and he came to the kneeling drowned dead, and he spoke to them in the old tongue of house elves, which is a language of service and of loyalty and of belonging, the oldest magic of the hearth, and he told them that a true master had come at last, a keeper who would not throw them into any dark. And the drowned dead who had served the House of Black in life and been forgotten in death heard an elf speak of belonging and could not bear it, and turned from Cassius, and knelt now to the pair on the steps instead. The hall was a cathedral of war, the false stars guttered and flared, the frost crept and was beaten back and crept again. The heart burned above the empty throne, wakeful, brightening as the linked line of the family bled its warmth into the frozen dark, feeding it, giving to it, so that with every hand that gripped another hand the heart grew stronger, because it was being held now as it had not been held in 400 years, held by a whole family at once, and Cassius Black upon his stolen crown felt the heart brightening against him and did not understand it. Because a thief counts what is taken and cannot see what is freely given, and the giving was drowning him and he could not find its source. And through the battle toward the dais, toward the seat of stars and the heart burning above it, Harry and Hermione fought their way forward hand in hand, and the whole family bent its effort to opening a road for them, because everyone in that hall understood that the war would not be won by fighting the cold but by reaching the throne, and that only the two of them could do it, and only together. It was the hardest ground either of them had ever crossed, and it was only 40 feet of black glass. The cold came at them lengthwise, not to freeze them but to peel them apart, driving its ancient wedge again and again at the seam of their joined hands. And twice Harry felt the loneliness pour in and his grip begin to fail, and both times it was not his own strength that saved the join but the family's. A hand arriving on his shoulder out of the chaos, Remus, then Kingsley, an anchor thrown to a drowning man. And both times he found Hermione's hand again across the bridge of someone else's courage, and held on. They did not advance so much as get carried hand to hand, up a living rope of the people who loved them, and Harry understood, halfway across that terrible 40 feet, the thing Cassius would never understand and Alara had built the whole house to prove. That a pair is not two people strong enough to stand alone together, but two people who have stopped pretending they ever could and have let themselves be held up, and that the letting go of the pretense is not the weakness in it but the whole of its strength. They reached the foot of the dais, and Belvina Burke was between them and the steps, with Draco beside her and the dull crown in his shaking hands, and the frost was thick as a hoarfrost meadow around them, and the drowned king was very close to the surface of her now. "Put it on," said the thing to Draco, and its patience was gone. "Put it on your head, reach for the heart, take what these unworthy children were given for free. Finish it, boy, and be a king, and never be small or frightened or overlooked again." And Draco Malfoy lifted the crown toward his own head and stopped. He stopped with it an inch above his brow, and his arms shook, and his white face worked, and Harry, 10 feet away with Hermione's hand in his, did the last thing anyone expected in the middle of a battle, which was that he spoke to Draco Malfoy gently. "Don't," Harry said, not a command, not a taunt, just a word across the frost to a frightened person about to make an unbearable mistake. "Draco, don't. I know what she's told you, that you're worthy, that you'll never be small again, that all you have to do is be strong enough to take it. I had the same speech in the deep from the same voice, only it offered me my dead parents, and you know what I worked out." His hand stayed locked in Hermione's. "It only ever wants you to take because taking is what breaks you. The crown doesn't make you a king. It makes you the next lonely thing on that throne in the dark, 400 years of it, carving not worthy into a wall because you can't stop hearing it. That's what she's offering you, not a crown, a hole, and you don't have to climb into it. Whatever your father made you think you owe this family, you don't owe it your soul. He is worthless," hissed the thing in Burke, half-blood filth. "He will say anything, Draco." It was Narcissa now, pushing through the frost to her son, and her composure was gone entirely, and what was under it was only a mother. "Draco, look at me, not at her, at me. I felt it come off that crown the first time she showed it to you, and I have been too frightened of your father and too proud to say it, and I am done being both. Put it down. Whatever you are, whatever you have done, whatever you think you have to prove, you are my son, and I would rather have you small and frightened and alive and mine for the rest of my life than crowned for 1 hour and gone into that dark forever. Put it down." Her voice broke. "Please, I have already lost too much to this family's pride. Do not make me lose you to it too." And Draco Malfoy, 19 years old, who had been told his whole life that he was born to hold this, who had wanted more than anything in the world to be told he was worthy, looked at his mother's ruined face and looked at the crown an inch above his head, and heard at last the difference between his mother's voice, which was breaking with love, and the voice in his ear, which had never once in all its promises sounded like it loved him at all. He lowered the crown. And then he threw it down onto the black glass at Burke's feet, and it rang like a cracked bell, and he stepped back from it, shaking, and said, in a voice with nothing left in it but the truth, "No, I won't. I don't want to be a king. I just wanted somebody to think I was worth something, and you've been using that, and my mother thinks I'm worth something without any of it, so no, find someone else, I'm done." Narcissa reached her son and pulled him into her arms, there in the frost at the foot of the dais, and for one breath it seemed to Harry that it might be over, that the hinge of the whole night had turned on a frightened boy choosing his mother's love over a dead king's crown, and that the crowning could now proceed as it should, 2 claimants and a heart and a clean choosing. He felt Hermione's hand tighten in his, and felt her think the same thing, and felt in the same instant both of them realize how naive it was, because a hunger 400 years old does not stake everything on a 19-year-old's nerve and simply lose when the nerve holds. Draco's refusal had not defeated Cassius. It had only stripped away the last polite fiction Cassius had bothered to wear. For a moment the thing wearing Belvina Burke was utterly still. And then it laughed, and the laugh was 400 years old and had no bottom to it, and Burke's pale eyes turned fully to frost, and the last of the woman went out of them. "Do you imagine," said Cassius Black, at last entirely present, straightening up out of the borrowed body to his full drowned height, "that I ever needed young Malfoy? He was a convenience, a proud head to spare me the effort. But I have worn this one for a year now, worn her down to a glove, and I find I no longer require a volunteer." Belvina Burke's hand closed on the fallen crown and lifted it, and the drowned king set it upon the head he had already stolen, upon Belvina Burke's gray hair, and where it touched her the frost bloomed outward in a killing wave, and the woman that had been Belvina Burke was gone entirely, subsumed, and what stood upon the black glass at the foot of the Seat of Stars was Cassius Black himself, robed in a living woman's body and crowned in his own stolen crown. Come up at last out of 400 years of the deep to finish the theft the heart had interrupted, and the whole hall darkened around him, and the drowned dead knelt, and the cold became absolute. Lucius Malfoy watched his ally become a 400-year-old horror in a dead woman's skin, and the certainty that had carried him through a lifetime of quiet victories drained out of his pale face all at once. He had thought he was using Belvin Burke. He had thought the crown was a means, and the crowning a formality, and the whole affair a matter of gold and blood and patient maneuver, a game he understood, a game he always won. He looked now at the thing standing where his ally had been, at the frost blooming from its feet, at his own son white and shaking beside the crown he had thrown down, and Lucius understood far too late exactly what he had brought into the House of Black, and what it would have done to Draco, and what it had very nearly done through him. For once in his life he had no elegant thing to say. He reached out and took his son by the shoulder and pulled him back hard away from the dais, away from the crown, and put his own body between Draco and the drowned king, which was perhaps the first entirely unselfish thing Lucius Malfoy had done in 30 years, and he did it not because he had become good, but because even a calculating man, when the ledger finally shows him the true price, may find there is one line he was never willing to pay. "Sissa," he said, low, hoarse, "get him out. Get him behind the Weasley woman's line. Now." "Now," said Cassius, and turned his frost-white eyes upon Harry and Hermione at the foot of the steps. "The pair, the worthy, let us have our crowning after all, you and I, in the sight of all these witnesses, and let the heart of Black choose between the king who will take it and the children who wait to be given it, and let us see at the last which of us it truly wants. Climb your steps, reach your throne, I will be interested to watch you fail." Harry looked at Hermione. Her hand was locked in his, and behind them the whole family held the line against the cold, bleeding warmth into the frozen hall, and Sirius lay dying in the keep above, and the heart burned wakeful and waiting over the empty throne, and everything they were and everything they loved had come down to the 7 black steps in front of them and the thing that stood between them and the top. "Together," Hermione said. "Together," Harry said. And hand in hand, with a dead king crowned and waiting above them and a family holding the dark at their backs, the true heirs of the House of Black set their feet on the first of the 7 steps of the Seat of Stars and began to climb. The first step was easy. The second took the strength of both of them. By the third, Cassius had understood that they meant to reach the throne, and he turned the whole weight of the deep against the steps, and the frost poured down the black stone toward them, and the cold drove at the joint of their hands with 400 years of practiced cruelty, and Harry felt the loneliness of the cupboard and the graveyard rise up in him to meet it, every abandonment of his life summoned at once, and beside him he felt Hermione stagger under her own summoned grief. And the fourth step was a wall of it, but they did not climb alone, and that was the thing Cassius could not factor, because he had spent 400 years learning to break a pair and had never once studied what a pair looked like with a family behind it. Every hand in that hall was linked to another, and the chain of them ran up from the black glass floor to the foot of the dais and did not stop there. Andromeda's hand was on Hermione's shoulder, Remus's hand was on Harry's. And the warmth of the whole family poured up the 7 steps behind them, hand to hand to hand, a living rope thrown up out of the cold, and Harry and Hermione climbed it as much as they climbed the stone, and the 5th step came, and the 6th, and the frost could not freeze a stair that a family was climbing together. At the 7th step Cassius Black stood between them and the throne, crowned and vast and terrible, and above him the heart of Black burned at its brightest and most wakeful, sensing the hour, sensing the pair beginning slowly to descend, and the drowned king spread his arms across the last step, and the frost howled off him in a killing gale, and he said, "You will not pass. You are worthy, and worthy is not enough. I have waited 400 years, and I will not be gone on without again." Harry looked at the thing on the last step, and he did not falter, and Hermione's hand was locked in his, and behind and below them a whole family held the warmth of an ancient wild power up toward them like an offering, and above them the heart came down. "We're not here to pass you," Hermione said, and her voice rang clear through the frozen hall. "We're here to be given a crown and then to give it away, and there is nothing you can do to stop a gift, because you have never once in 400 years understood what one is. Look up, Cassius, it's already coming down, not to you, to us, and we're not going to keep it either." And the heart of Black descended toward the 7th step, toward the crowned dead king and the joined living pair, to choose at last, in the sight of every witness, between the one who would take it and the 2 who waited to receive it, and the crowning of the House of Black began in earnest. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, crowned of the black star, the heart of Black came down between them, and time in the obsidian hall seemed to thicken and slow, so that the battle raging across the black glass floor faded to a distant surf, and there were only 3 things left in all the world: the drowned king crowned upon the 7th step, the joined pair upon the 6th, and the dark star sinking through the air between. It stopped at the height of a reaching hand, and it turned, and it looked at them all. Harry felt it look at him, the same vast attention he had felt at the recognition, but deeper now and hungrier, because this was not a betrothal but a wedding, and the heart had waited 400 years for it, and would not be denied its choosing. He felt it weigh Cassius, and he felt it weigh himself, and he felt it weigh Hermione, and he understood in the slow, gold dark light of it that the heart was not choosing between a strong claimant and a weak one, or a pure claimant and a deluded one, or even a wicked claimant and a good one. It was choosing between two answers to a single question, the oldest question of the house, the one the pureblood centuries had buried and Cassius had drowned and Alara had asked at the very beginning on this same headland 900 years before, not who is worthy to hold this power, but who is willing to be held by it. Cassius answered first, because Cassius had been rehearsing his answer for 4 centuries. He reached up with both of Belvina Burke's stolen hands and seized the heart of Black. It was the same reaching that had cast him into the deep 400 years before, and he knew it, and he did it anyway, because a grief that has curdled into certainty cannot learn, can only repeat, louder each time, the mistake that broke it. His frost-white fingers closed around the dark star and he wrenched at it, dragging it toward the crown on his brow, commanding it in the old pure Latin to acknowledge him, to be his, to be owned, and the whole hall shuddered, and the false stars overhead wheeled backward, and the drowned dead moaned, and for one terrible moment the heart's light dimmed under his grip, guttering toward Black, because Cassius Black was strong, 400 years of hunger strong. And he had both hands on it and the will of a king who had never once in death or life been told no in a voice he would accept. Mine, Cassius roared, and the word rang through the hall and up the inner stair and shook the keep above. I have waited. I have endured the dark and the cold and the 400 years of not worthy, and I have earned, and it is mine. It isn't, Hermione said. She did not shout it. She said it clearly into the shuddering dark, and Harry felt her hand lock in his, and he understood what she meant to do, because they had rehearsed it in the empty state hall until it was a thing their two bodies knew, and he moved with her, and they did not reach for the heart. They opened their hands to it. That was the whole of it. That was the answer 400 years in the making, the answer Alara had built the house to give, and Luna had found in a margin and Hermione had drawn out of a footnote no thief had ever bothered to read. Cassius seized the heart with both hands and dragged it toward himself. Harry and Hermione turned their joined hands palm up beneath it, open, and did not grasp, and did not command, and did not so much as lean toward it, and Hermione spoke the true words of the founding rite, the receiving words, in a voice that carried over the drowned king's roaring. We do not take you, she said. We have never once tried to take you. We come with open hands, be held or do not be held, but you will not be seized by us, because a thing that is seized is not a keeper's at all. We only offer to hold you freely, the two of us, forever, and to give away everything you ever give us. That is the whole of our claim, not that we are strong enough to take you, that we are willing to receive you and never to close our hands. Her palm was open and steady beneath the dark star. The choice was always yours. It was never ours to win by force, come to the open hands or stay in the closed ones. But you know which of us is trying to own you, and you know exactly how that story ends, because you lived it once already, on this very step 400 years ago. And the heart of Black, gripped in the fists of a king who would own it, and hanging above the open hands of two who would only hold it, chose. It poured out of Cassius's grasping hands like water out of a broken jar. There was no wrenching, no struggle, no contest of strength, because strength had never been the question and the heart had never once in 900 years been won by force. It simply flowed from the closed hands that clutched it into the open hands that did not, the way water finds the lower place, the way warmth finds the cold, the way, Hermione had said in the firelit keep, love finds the one who chooses instead of the one who grasps. The dark star ran out of Cassius's stolen fingers and down through the air and settled, weightless and blazing, into the cup of Harry and Hermione's joined palms, and the moment it touched them the whole vast hall of night blazed gold. The light of the heart, the impossible dark radiance that had no name, turned in that instant to the deep old gold of the last light before a storm, and it swept out from the pair on the 6th step in a single expanding wave, and where it touched, the frost died. It rolled across the black glass floor, and the ice cracked and melted and ran away into nothing. It struck the linked line of the family and did not knock them down, but lifted them, every hand that gripped another hand suddenly warm, suddenly strong. The exhaustion of the long battle burned away in a breath. It reached the drowned dead, and they did not moan now but sighed, a great collective exhalation of 400 years of loneliness finally ending, and one by one they straightened and turned toward the light, and were no longer the memory of the forgotten, but simply the dead of the House of Black, come at last into the warmth of a house that remembered them. Cassius Black stood upon the 7th step with his stolen crown in his empty grasping hands, and stared at the heart blazing gold in the open palms of the pair below him, and did not understand and could not understand, because the thing that had happened was the one thing 400 years of hunger had made him incapable of seeing. How, he said, the roar was gone from his voice. What was left was the thing under the roar, the thing that had been under it all along, a widower's bewildered grief. I held it, I had both hands on it, I was stronger. How does the stronger hand lose to the open one? How? I do not, I have never. And Belvina Burke's stolen face, wearing the drowned king, crumpled, and the certainty that had held Cassius together for 4 centuries began at the edges to come apart. It was supposed to be mine, if I was only strong enough, if I only endured enough. It was supposed to. She died, and I could not hold her, and I swore I would never again lose the thing I built the crown so I would never again be the one left holding an empty hand. I know, Harry said. He did not say it as a taunt. He said it as one person says it to another who is finally, after a very long time, telling the truth, and the whole hall heard the change in it, and even the battle behind them stilled. I know, Harry said again, and he did not let go of Hermione's hand, and the heart blazed gold between them, and he looked up the last step at the ruined, grieving thing that had haunted the house for 400 years. You lost her, your pair. And it broke you, and you decided the answer was to never be breakable again, so you built a crown to make love into a thing that couldn't be taken from you, and the heart threw you in the dark for it, and you've spent 4 centuries down there carving not worthy into the walls because you couldn't work out why. And nobody ever came. That's the real wound, isn't it? Not that you lost her. That when you went down into the dark, nobody grieved you, nobody came. The house scraped your name off every wall and toasted your fall and left you alone with your empty hand for 400 years, and you told yourself you didn't need anyone, you needed a crown, because needing people was the thing that had broken you in the first place. Harry's voice did not waver. I grew up in a cupboard, Cassius. I know exactly what it does to a person, being the one nobody comes for. It nearly made me into you. The only reason it didn't is that eventually someone came. And once someone comes, you find out the wanting was never the weakness. The wanting was the only thing worth having. And Harry did the thing that no one in the hall expected, least of all Cassius, and the thing that unmade him. He and Hermione lifted the heart of Black in their joined open hands, and they gave some of it away, to Cassius, freely. The gold light reached up the last step and touched the drowned king, and it did not burn him, and it did not cast him down, and it did not fight him, because it was not a weapon, it had never been a weapon. That was the whole thing Cassius had never understood. It was a gift. It reached him the way warmth reaches a man who has been cold so long he has forgotten there was ever anything else, and it gave him, at the very last, the one thing 400 years of taking had never gotten him and could never have gotten him, because it was a thing that can only be received. It gave him someone who had come. It gave him Harry's understanding, and Hermione's, and Andromeda's voice from the floor of the hall calling the forgotten dead by name with love, and Alara's 900-year grief for the keeper who had gone wrong. All of it poured into him at once, and Cassius Black, who had waited 400 years alone in the dark for someone to grieve that he was gone, was, at the very end, grieved. The crown fell from Belvina Burke's brow and struck the black step and shattered, not with violence but with release, the stolen light in it flowing home into the heart, and the frost went out of the woman's stolen body, and she sagged, and Cassius Black stood free of his crown for the first time in 400 years, a thing of shadow and old grief, and he looked down at the pair who had given him what he could not take. And something in the ruined shape of him that had almost forgotten it was a face came apart entirely, and it was not rage. It was the oldest and simplest thing there is. It was relief. You came, said Cassius Black, wondering in a voice with 400 years of cold finally going out of it. Someone came, after all of it, someone came. Someone came, Hermione said gently. You can stop now, Cassius. You can put the empty hand down. It's over. Go and be with her. Go and rest. Nobody's going to leave you in the dark anymore. And the shade of Cassius Black, the drowned king, the uncrowned, the pretender in the deep, looked at the two young keepers holding the heart of Black in their open hands, and he bowed his head and he let go, and the shadow of him thinned and softened and rose and was gone. 400 years of grief finally answered and finally at rest, and where he had stood there was only Belvina Burke, an old woman freed of the thing that had worn her, sinking to her knees on the black step, weeping, hollow, alive. The deep closed, down through the melted floor of the hall, the abyss that had held the drowned king sealed itself, the black ice knitting hole and the false stars overhead steadied and brightened into true ones, and the cold was gone from the obsidian hall entirely, gone as though it had never been, and the heart of Black burned gold and warm and wakeful in the open hands of the two who had received it. And now, at last, it crowned them. There was no diadem. That was the first thing and the truest, and the thing the House of Black had forgotten for 300 proud years. The true crowning of a keeper had never once involved a crown, because a crown is a thing you wear, a thing you own, a thing that sits on one head and says this one and no other, and the heart did not want a wearer, it wanted a pair of keepers, and so it did not settle onto their brows. It rose from their joined hands and it wrapped around the both of them, the gold light winding up their arms and across their shoulders and settling over the two of them together like a mantle woven for two, and where it touched them it did not weigh them down but lifted them. And Harry felt the whole ancient strength of the House of Black settle into the bond between himself and Hermione, not into him, not into her, into the space between them, the join. the thing they had made together and defended in the deep and would hold now for the rest of their lives. The voice spoke in the hall, the voice that came from the stone and the stars and the black glass and the deep foundations of the earth, and this time every witness heard it, the whole trembling company of the Wisengamot and the council of cousins and the found family and the Malfoys, and afterward none of them could agree on the words, only on what it meant. Received, said the heart of black. After 400 years and 900 and all the long cold reign of the closed hand received. Two who were cast out and would not be cast down, two who chose and would not close their hands. Blood I acknowledge, and worth I have weighed, and will I have heard, and love I have seen, freely given, freely returned, held between two hands that neither fear nor greed can pry apart. You are crowned. You are the keepers of this house, its heart and its hearth and its whole remade meaning, and you will hold me not to own me but to give me away, and a house that gives is a house that cannot be emptied, and so this house will never again run cold. Rise, keepers of the house of black, rise and be its warmth. Harry and Hermione rose to the top of the dais, to the seat of stars, and they did not sit in it, because the throne had been built for one and they were two, and instead they turned hand in hand, mantled in the gold light of the heart, and faced the hall, and the hall erupted, not in war, in light. The gold radiance of the heart poured out of the pair on the dais and filled the whole cathedral of night, and it ran up the black columns and into the true stars overhead and out across the floor to every soul in the hall, and it reached them, all of them, the whole family that had come down into the dark and held the line and refused to be divided, and it gave to each of them freely a share of the oldest warmth in Britain, and Hermione had been right in the firelit library at 3 in the morning. The giving did not empty the well, the giving deepened it, and the more the heart poured out of them the brighter it burned, until the obsidian hall that had been a place of cold and exile and 400 years of grief blazed like a struck bell of pure gold light, and the drowned dead of the house of black, no longer drowned, no longer forgotten, rose into the light and were at last every one of them at peace. The obsidian founders along the walls, the hundreds of carved keepers who had watched the rite in stone since before the Romans, turned their heads as one, and the single point of pale light set in each of their breasts kindled to gold, and the whole ringing procession of them bowed, 9 centuries of keepers bowing at once to the pair who had finally set the house right, and the sound of that stone obeisance rolled through the hall like the tolling of a vast slow bell. High overhead the true stars of the vault wheeled into a pattern none of the astronomers among the witnesses could name, a constellation that had not been seen in the sky of the world for 1,000 years, the mark the heart set upon a true crowning, the sign it had last made on the night Alara knelt beside a wild old power and did not reach for it. And through it all the heart of black burned gold above the seat of stars, no longer the guttering coal that had waited in the dark, no longer the hard white warning of a house under siege, but a sun in miniature, warm and steady and inexhaustible, pouring itself out and growing brighter for the pouring, the paradox at the center of everything the house of black had forgotten, and its 2 cast-out children had come to teach it again. But there was one gift they gave before all the others, and they gave it first, before the house and before the family and before the witnesses, because Harry had made a promise in a failing afternoon light and did not intend to keep the house of black waiting a single second longer than his godfather. Serious, Harry said, and turned the gold light of the heart, in his mind and in his open hands, up the inner stair toward the keep above, toward the room where a man lay gray and still with frost in his dark hair, and he gave. Far above in the warm room in the keep, by the great fire that had not been able to warm him, Sirius Black drew a breath that did not come slow and did not come a long way apart, and the frost in his dark hair melted all at once and ran down his temples like the ordinary water it should always have been, and the gray went out of his skin, and warmth came back into his cold hands, and his eyes opened, and the first thing the last lord of the old house of black saw, waking, was the gold light of the heart pouring in under the door of the room to find him, sent up 7 black steps and a long inner stair and 140 years of exile by a godson who had promised, and kept it. He would tell them later that he had heard all of it. That the cold of the deep had put him somewhere between the world and the dark, and that he had lain there the whole time listening, to Harry talking to him in the failing light, to the battle in the hall below, to the voice of the heart, and that he had been trying the whole time to find his way back and could not, until the gold came up the stair and took his cold hand and pulled. He would tell them he had heard Harry promise to bring the crown up and give it to him first, before the house, before anything, and that he had thought, drifting in the dark, that it was the most black thing and the least black thing he had ever heard, a keeper's first act being to spend the whole ancient inheritance on one broken man by a fire, and that he had understood, hearing it, that the house was finally, after 1,000 years, in the right hands. He got up. He was weak, and Andromeda would scold him for it, and Molly would put him back to bed within the hour, but he got up, because he was Sirius Black and he was not going to miss his godson's coronation lying down, and he came to the head of the inner stair in his nightclothes with the gold light all around him, and he looked down the long descent into the blazing hall, and he saw them. Harry and Hermione, mantled in the light of the heart, standing hand in hand before the seat of stars in the hall of his fathers that had never once opened for him, and had opened at the end for them. And Sirius Black, who had spent his whole life running from his name, sat down on the top step of the inner stair with the gold warmth of a healing still moving in his hands, and watched the two people he loved most in the world remake the thing his family had spent 3 centuries poisoning. And he wept, and he was not ashamed, and after all the years since he was a boy of 9 dreaming of a keep with dogs in the hall and children on the stairs, Sirius Black was entirely, uncomplicatedly home. That was where Remus found him, on the top step of the inner stair, and Remus sat down beside his oldest friend without a word and put an arm around him, and the two last marauders sat together and looked down into the golden hall and did not speak for a long time, because there was nothing that needed saying that the last 20 years had not already said. "I told you I'd see the keep," Sirius managed at last, thickly. "Took me 40 years and nearly dying, but I saw it, Moony. And it was everything we said it would be when we were 17, and it was all just a story to keep the dark off." Remus laughed wetly and did not let go of him, and below them Harry looked up the stair once and saw the two of them there, the godfather he had almost lost and the last of his father's friends, sitting together in the warmth, and it was, he would think afterward, the exact moment the whole terrible, beautiful night finally became a victory, because a victory is not the enemy defeated, it is the people you love safe together in a warm place at the end. The remaking of the House of Black took the rest of that night and would take, in truth, the rest of their lives, but it began in the blazing hall, and it began with the names. Far away in London, in the drawing room of Number 12 Grimmauld Place, the great tapestry blazed gold on its wall, and the burned names came back. Not 2 of them now, not only Gola and Doria, but all of them, every daughter and son the House of Black had ever struck from its tree for the crime of loving where they chose, or being born without magic, or taking the wrong side in the family's long war on the world. Marius Black, born a squib and cast out for it, came back in gold. Cedrella, who married a Weasley. Phineas the younger, who took the Muggle's side. Andromeda, disowned for her Ted. And Sirius himself, burned off by his own mother at 16, came back onto the wall in letters of gold brighter than any name upon it, restored not as the family's shame, but as its bridge, the last lord of the old house who had refused the poison long enough for the true keepers to come and pour it out. And beneath the crest, where the motto had read Tauger's purr for 300 proud and terrible years, the silver threads unpicked themselves and rewove, and the new words that came up out of the gold were not chosen by Harry or Hermione or any living hand, but by the heart itself, remembering at last what it had always been for, and they read, in the old tongue and plain for anyone to translate, Tauger's La Mason, always the house, not always pure, always the home. Always the hearth kept lit and the door kept open and the cast-out welcomed back and the cold held off, for anyone, of any blood, who chose this family and was chosen by it in return. In the deep gallery under Grimmauld Place, the blue sconces blazed, and the portraits of the cast-out, unburned now, their frames healing gold, laughed and wept in their canvases, and at the far end Yola Black sat up in her mended frame with her stubborn chin high and her eyes streaming and cried out to no one and everyone, "I told them. 140 years I've sat in this dark and I told them, married for love, best thing I ever did, and here's my girl crowned in the hall that burned me, oh I told them so." And in the obsidian hall the found family came up the dais, all of them, and the crowning became what a crowning of the House of Black had never once been in 1,000 years, which was a homecoming with too many people in it. Andromeda came first and took Harry's face and Hermione's in her hands and could not speak. Remus embraced them both and then went up the inner stair 2 at a time, weak legs be damned, to reach Sirius. The Weasleys crowded round in a wall of red hair and relief. Neville and Luna, Kingsley and McGonagall, Bill and Fleur, and Tonks with her hair blazing triumphant gold now instead of red. Creature, who had carried a king's crown out of the deep, was lifted onto the dais by Harry's own hands and set beside them, an elf standing at the right hand of the keepers of the House of Black, and the old creature looked out over the blazing hall and the restored dead, and wept that his mother had not lived to see it, and was glad past speaking that he had. Wizarding Britain would spend a generation arguing about what had happened in the hall beneath the northern sea, and would get most of it wrong, as it got most things wrong, and it did not matter, because the thing itself was already true, and did not require the country's belief to go on being true. What mattered stood on the dais in the gold light, not a lord in his court, not a dynasty restored to its old cold grandeur, but a family, ordinary and enormous, a healed man weeping on a stair, and a mother reclaiming a son and an elf at the right hand of the keepers, and a portrait 140 years old shouting that she had been right, all of them gathered in the warmth of a house that had finally remembered it was supposed to be a home. The House of Black would be different now, and it would take years, and there would be committees, as Hermione had grimly promised, and a great deal of law to invent and a great deal of gold to give away, and a whole poisoned reputation to live down one kind act at a time. But the direction was set in the hall that night by two people who had been thrown into the dark and had refused to become the dark, and every keeper of the House of Black who came after them down all the long years to come would inherit not a motto about blood but a fire kept lit and a door kept open, which was in the end the only inheritance the first keeper had ever meant to leave. The reckoning with the enemies was quieter than the war, as reckonings after true victories tend to be. Belvina Burke, freed of the thing that had worn her for a year, was an old woman broken and hollowed, and the healers would find wholly herself again, with no more memory of the drowned king's year in her skin than a sleeper has of a fevered dream, and there was no justice in punishing a glove for the hand that had worn it, and so there was none, and she was taken away to be cared for, and that was the end of her. Lucius Malfoy had no such refuge, because Lucius had not been possessed. Lucius had merely been ambitious, and had brought a 400-year-old horror into the oldest house in Britain out of greed, and had very nearly fed it his own son, and the Wisengamot's appointed witnesses had seen every moment of it, and there would be a reckoning in the plum-robed chamber that no amount of Malfoy gold would smooth away, and Lucius knew it, standing pale and diminished in the blazing hall with the ruin of his ambition around him. But it was not Harry or Hermione who dealt him the wound that landed, it was his son. Draco stood by his mother with the crown he had refused shattered on the steps behind him, and when Lucius reached for him out of habit, out of the lifelong assumption that his son was a piece he could move, Draco stepped away, not in fury, just in a plain new distance, and said, "No, father." Not any more, and went to stand instead with his mother on his own feet, as he had never once in his life stood before, and Lucius Malfoy watched the last thing he had truly wanted walk out of his reach, and understood that he had crowned no one and lost everything, and that he had done it entirely to himself. Harry found Draco afterward at the edge of the hall and did not gloat, because there was no gloating left in him, only the memory of a frightened person choosing right at the last possible second, which he respected more than he could easily say. "You threw it down," Harry said, "when it was an inch from your head and every reason in the world said to put it on. You threw it down. That took more than taking it ever would have." "My mother asked me to," Draco said, not looking at him. "She asked, you chose." Harry held out his hand. "For what it's worth, the House of Black is going to be a different thing now. Open door, any blood, anyone who chooses it. That includes you if you ever want it. You're a cousin Malfoy through your mother, and the new house doesn't burn cousins off walls. Something to think about." Draco looked at the offered hand for a long moment, and did not take it, not yet, because he was Draco and some things take time, but he did not sneer at it either, and he gave a short nod that was, from him, an entire treaty, and that was enough, and would grow into more in the years that came. Ogden found Harry and Hermione before he climbed the stair to carry the news to Britain, and the old keeper of the register took off his hat, which he had done twice now in his long life and both times in this hall, and he looked at the two young keepers with something on his unbribable face that no petitioner had ever coaxed there in 60 years of trying. "I have witnessed a great many things I did not wish to record," he said, "and one or two I was glad to. This will be the last entry in my register, because a man ought to retire on his best work, and there will never be better than tonight." He turned the hat in his hands. "I have spent my life defending the letter of the old law because I did not trust anyone to be worthy of its spirit. I was wrong to be so cautious for so long. The spirit was always the point, and it was always this: a house is not a wall to keep people out, it is a fire to bring people in." He put the hat back on. "I will write it down exactly as I saw it, and I will defend it with my name, and my name has never been attached to a truer thing. Rule well, keepers, and send for me at the wedding. I find to my considerable surprise that I should like to see it." He climbed the stair. And the great blazing hall began to quiet, the gold light settling from its noonday blaze to a warm and steady glow, and the family drifted up after him in twos and threes toward the warm keep and the sleep they had all earned, Molly herding the exhausted before her, Andromeda pausing at the arch to look back once at the hall that had burned her name and restored it, Creature moving among the columns with nothing left to do but be glad, because there was nothing cold left to guard against, only warmth. Everywhere, in every stone of a house that had spent 300 years being feared and would now, for as long as its keepers held it, be a place that anyone frightened and cast out and cold could come home to. It was near dawn when the hall finally emptied, the witnesses gone up to carry the impossible news to a wizarding Britain that would argue about it for a generation, the family gone up to the keep to sleep at last in a fortress that was warm in every stone, and Harry and Hermione were left alone at the top of the dais, the two of them, mantled still in the low gold light of the heart, which burned now above the seat of stars, steady and warm, and for the first time in 400 years entirely content. They stood a while and did not speak, because there was a whole language open between them that still had no words, and they were content to leave it so. "We're going to have to actually do this," Hermione said eventually, and there was wonder in her voice and something close to laughter. "Run it. A 1,000-year-old magical dynasty with vaults and a Wisengamot seat and a hall full of ancestors and a motto I'm going to have to get used to. There'll be so much to read. There'll be committees, Harry. I'm going to have to invent a whole new body of magical law about a form of inheritance that hasn't legally existed since 1712. She sounded, beneath the exhaustion, entirely delighted. It's the most magnificent problem anyone has ever handed me, and I have no idea where to even begin. You'll begin the way you begin everything, Harry said, by reading everything, terrifying everyone, and being right. He turned her toward him, both hands in the gold light, and he looked at her, the woman who had come for him first and never once stopped coming, the equal partner the heart had braided his name to in gold, the whole of his family in a single person. We'll figure it out together, the way it wants, the way we said. His hand came up and touched her face. There's just one thing I want settled before the committees start, and before Ogden writes it all down, and before Rita Skeeter finds out and calls it a scandal, because I want it on the record that it happened here tonight in this hall and not because a wall wrote our names in gold. And what's that? Hermione said, though she knew, and her hand had already found the front of his robes. Marry me, Harry said, not for the house. Not because the heart wants a pair, though it does, and not because it's tidy, though it is. Because you made a list when you were 15 of all the reasons it was impractical to love me, and you ignored every single one of them for 7 years, and I have never once deserved it, and I intend to spend the rest of my life trying to. Marry me, Hermione. Let's be the pair on purpose. Let's be the two who chose, out loud in front of everyone, for good. And Hermione Granger, daughter of the daughters of Iola Black, who had run off 140 years before and married for love and let them burn her name off a wall and would do it again 1,000 times over, looked up at Harry Potter in the gold light of the House of Black, and she did not make a list, and she did not weigh the impracticalities, and she did not, for once in her brilliant, careful life, have a single word of caution to offer anyone. Yes, she said, obviously, yes. I chose you before I had the sense to be frightened of it, and I've never once unchosen you, and I'm not going to start now. She took his face in both her hands. Yes, Harry, on purpose, out loud, for good. He kissed her there at the top of the Seat of Stars, in the gold light of the oldest magic in Britain, and above them the heart of Black flared once, bright and warm and glad, blessing the pair it had crossed 900 years and 400 years and 140 years of exile and cold and grief to find, and far below the deep lay sealed and quiet at last, and far above the keep slept warm with a family too large for it. And in London a tapestry blazed gold with every restored name upon it and a new motto over the door, always the house, always the home, always the door kept open and the hearth kept lit for anyone of any blood who chose this family and was chosen in return. They had been cast into the dark, the two of them, the daughter of the burned line and the son of the quiet one, and the dark had not been able to keep them, and now they stood crowned in the warmth they had made hand in hand, keepers of a house remade in the image of the thing it had spent 300 years trying to destroy, which was in the end and always had been and would be now forever, love freely given and freely returned, held between two open hands. Chapter 7 End.